Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm, and you are watching What If Naruto helped Hinata after Hyuga Massacre. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Overhanging the secret village of Konoha was a clear, starry night. People were using the streetlights to help them find their way home, while others were heading to restaurants and bars with their loved ones. However, none of these individuals knew what was happening at the Hyuga compound. Hyuga Hanabi turned 13 on that day as the light from the lanterns flickered across the walls and tables adorned with streamers and flowers. The compound came alive with music. A number of lords and diplomats from the various countries were present, along with nearly the whole clan. Hanabi was sitting by herself in her bedroom. Despite the fact that it was her party, she was sent to her room to reflect on her actions and, more importantly, to get some distance from the events outside. She was used to being surrounded by her clan, but she wasn't happy with the others, so even though it had been her party, she felt the need to leave. The lords and diplomats were invited in the hopes of arranging a marriage because the clan elders had determined that she would require a husband if she were to become the head of the clan. Disturbed not only by the notion of an arranged marriage but also by the fact that her birthday was being used as a platform for promotion, Hanabi had expressed her worries and begged her father to put an end to them. Although Hiashi declared that he would never compel either of his daughters to enter into an arranged marriage, he was powerless to prevent the elders from inviting potential suitors. As a result, she was constantly meeting with people hoping to be her suitor from the moment the party began. Only a small number of them were courteous and respectful. The rest were her problem. Others were attempting to bribe her with cash, jewelry, or the opportunity to hold more authority, while others were begging and pleading with her to marry them. After trying unsuccessfully to win Hinata's hand in marriage, the son of one lord decided to try to threaten the younger girl after being turned down once more. This had been a grave error because she defended herself by giving him a juken shot to the lower part of his body. As soon as he attempted to physically threaten her before long, Hiashi had him expelled, but not before sending Hanabi to her room after the elders urged her to stop acting in a manner unbecoming of a Hyuga. When her father sent her away, she was still reflecting on what he had said. "Consider what you have done and other ways you could have hit him more discreetly." She laughed a little at this because, only a few years ago, she would have been severely punished for such an act, but now he was much more at ease. Although he was still strict and cold to outsiders, he had changed his attitude toward the clan to one of openness and compassion. As she considered this, she glanced at the two photos on top of her dresser. The first was a photograph of her mother, a woman with long midnight black hair and light lavender eyes, standing next to her father, who was clearly happy and proud. A young Hinata, wearing a gentle smile, stood between them. What Hanabi valued most about his photo, however, was what her mother was holding. Hanabi, who was only a few days old, was sleeping before her mother died a few weeks later. It was the only photo she had of her family. She only remembered her chilly father and her difficult training. She was unable to recall her mother. She looked at the second picture, which featured a happy Hinata and Neji, both of whom were wearing one of their rare, joyful smirks. Hanabi, who was smiling like a Cheshire cat, pulled the two of them closer together in an embrace. She didn't want to think about the past. This was taken 2 weeks prior because Hinata would also be away but hoped to return in time for her party, and Neji would be absent due to a long-term mission. However, the picture acted as a reminder that they both still cared for her even though she hadn't returned and the mission had taken longer than anticipated. This is the current situation. We're at last a happy family, she thought. When she heard loud shouting and screaming coming from the courtyard where the party was being assisted, her train of thought was abruptly interrupted. She was curious about the disturbance and slid her bedroom door open to see what was going on, but she was stopped when she noticed a man in a black cloak obstructing her path. "Who are you and what's going on?" With a casual glance at the lone figure, she asked. The man just smiled and lunged at her without saying anything. She instinctively avoided his attack and defended herself by striking him in the chest 3 times before he fell to his knees and hit the ground face down. Uncertain whether the man was dead or not, she gazed down at him. Although she had prior combat experience, it had only been in training, and the realization of what she had just done hit her hard. When a second figure emerged in the doorway, she squatted down next to the man in a panic to see how he was doing. When Hanabi realized who it was, she instantly recovered her composure and stood up, prepared to defend herself once more. The oldest clan elder is Hyuga Dachi. With a worried expression on his face, as though attempting to ascertain what had transpired, he glanced from Hanabi to the body on the ground and back again. Hanabi said in a panicked voice as she began to lose her cool, "Daichi-sama just came at me. I had to defend myself. What's going on outside?" His stern expression returned, and Hanabi steeled herself from her emotions once more. "We're being attacked. Your father is leading the cadet branch to hold them back. He sent me to take you to a safe place," he said without uttering another word. he turned around and left the compound, Hanabi trailing closely behind. They both heard more screaming as they came out of a passageway at the rear of the compound. Hanabi paused, worried about her clan, and turned on her Byakugan to see what was going on. The majority of the dead bodies in the courtyard, she realized, were Hyuga. When she saw 3 Hyugas charging at a man who was dressed exactly like the one who had attacked her earlier, she couldn't comprehend how so many of them could have been eliminated. She turned pale at what she saw next. He just raised his arms and made a one-handed seal. Instead of assuming a fighting stance, the men in front of him instantly went to their knees, clutching their foreheads as they screamed in pain before tumbling to the ground. He was able to use the curse seal. She looked around quickly, but the same thing was occurring. As she attempted to flee, someone grabbed her arm, pulled her back, and spun her around to face them. Daichi-sama, they can activate the curse seal. They're using it against them. We have to go back and help them, she yelled. What are yo? She began, but was cut off when she was struck in the stomach. Taking her breath away, she froze, and when she looked up, Daichi and 2 other men dressed like her assailant were staring down at her. Why? She asked, gasping for air as tears began to fall, but she never received a response because Daichi hit her in the back of the head, knocking her unconscious before the 3 of them took off across the rooftops. Daichi looked at the other 2 men and they nodded to him. He then picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. Out of sight of the gullible villagers below, they silently jumped from building to building. Daichi activated his Byakugan as they moved toward the Great Wall, keeping an eye out for anyone who might be pursuing them and looking for anything that might make their escape more difficult. As they got closer to the wall, he noticed a lone figure approaching them and became instantly alarmed. In an attempt to avoid a confrontation, he shifted the group's course in the hopes that his proximity would be coincidental, but he persisted in his approach. They stopped just in front of the wall, confronting their pursuer head-on and alerting the others they were with. The last person Daichi had wanted to see was standing in front of them, wearing a black and orange jacket and pants, a flak vest adorned with flames on the back, spiky blonde hair, and blue eyes that were staring right through them. Naruto Uzumaki, where do you anticipate going? Do you think I'm just going to let you walk out of here? He shouted at them. Do you truly believe you can now stop us all by yourself? In an attempt to scare him, the bigger of the 2 clocked, growling back and drawing a sword from his waist. Run along before I separate your head from your shoulders. Naruto maintained his serious demeanor, so it didn't have the desired effect. The other man pulled out a kunai and charged, shouting, "Screw him!" He struck out, driving his blade into Naruto's chest. As a sick smile spread across the man's face, he laughed and watched in shock as the boy in front of him vanished in a cloud of smoke and then reappeared behind him with a kunai to his neck. Should have run, kid. Naruto whispered into his ear, then slashed the blade across his throat before turning to face the others. Blood gushed from his opponent as his lifeless body hit the ground. When you fight me, I can number between 1 and 1,000. The other man screamed in rage as he saw his partner fall, lifted his sword above his head, and attempted to charge but was unsuccessful. He noticed 2 hands securing him to the ground by his ankles. As he looked down to see why he was immobile, he was abruptly pulled to the ground up to his neck before he could comprehend what was happening when the earth in front of him crumpled away and a silver-haired man with a headband covering his left eye and a face mask pulled himself out. He attempted to wriggle and squirm but was too tightly packed to do so. Daichi watched in disbelief as everything happened in front of him. It was too late when he tried to flee after regaining consciousness because Naruto had already arrived and had driven a Rasengan into his chest when the blow struck. He grabbed Hanabi with his free arm and sent Daichi flying backward into a nearby building, causing the wall to collapse as it hit. As the once peaceful and deserted streets were now crowded with people who had been awakened from their sleep and were interested in what had happened, he shifted Hanabi so she was supported in both of his arms and looked down at her to make sure she was okay. After learning that Naruto was involved, some people left, but others became more interested, even moving when he held the unconscious Hanabi in his arms and multiple Anbu squads arrived. Naruto looked back up to see Kakashi and a male Anbu wearing a bird mask approaching him, but he only saw minor bruises and scratches on her. How is she doing? Kakashi asked, his lone eye examining the 2 before scanning the ever-increasing crowd for additional dangers. Looking at the remnants of the building he had destroyed, he responded, she looks okay, but I'm not a medic, so we should get her to the hospital. 2 Anbu were searching through the debris to recover Daichi, while another appeared in a puff of smoke next to Naruto, taking Hanabi from him before vanishing in the same manner. At last, the Anbu with Kakashi said, we've secured the compound and eliminated the threat. These 2 here are our only prisoners. They gestured to Daichi and his accomplice, who were still buried in the ground. How are things going for the Hyuga? With a hint of sadness in his voice, the Anbu continued, but I'm afraid the Hyuga clan members did not survive. Hiashi is at the hospital in critical condition and the party guests are shaken up but most are unharmed. In response to this information, Kakashi shook his head and looked at the ground, while Naruto raised his head and whispered a single word into the night sky. Hinata. A warm breeze blew through the forest as the morning rose into the sky, and the trees shaded both people and animals. It was quiet, with rustling leaves, chirping birds, and small animals playing together before running away and hiding when something startled them. Woof. A boy in a jacket and form-fitting pants, with untidy brown hair and odd, fang-like markings on his cheeks, was leading two caravans down the trail. A small white dog, about the size of a horse, was running up and down beside him, chasing butterflies that had wandered into their path. One of the boys who was walking next to the first caravan yelled, "Kiba, control Akamaru, remember we are still on a mission." His eyes were covered by black glasses, his mouth was covered by a high collar, and he was wearing a big green and black jacket with the hood up. He began chasing after his dog and yelled back, "Relax Shino, if anything happens, me and Akamaru are ready." That may be, however, we are still on a mission and therefore we are required to show a level of professionalism. Akamaru barked in agreement as the two of them turned around and began racing back the way they had come. "Ah, come on Shino, try and lighten up." Hyuga Hinata, wearing a white and lavender jacket, her long blue hair blowing in the breeze behind her, and her lilac-tinted eyes looking around, sat on the roof of the last caravan while Kiba was arguing his point about having some fun at the front of the convoy. The space was clear, and she sighed. Protecting a caravan on its way to Suna and then another on its way back to Konoha was supposed to be a straightforward C-rank mission. They arrived at their destination a day early without any problems because the mission had begun so well. In keeping with her pledge to Hanabi to attend her party, she had hoped that this would allow them to go home sooner. However, this hope was dashed when the individuals they were supposed to be escorting home arrived in the village late before they reached Suna. They had to take a detour due to a broken bridge, and 2 days later, they were finally heading home. She noticed a package wrapped in purple paper when she turned to look behind her. It was the only positive outcome of this mission, she thought to herself, and she smiled. She went shopping to find Hanabi the ideal birthday present because she had so much extra time to spend waiting in the hidden sand village. She had thought about adding more porcelain figures to her expanding collection, but she was unable to locate any retailers that carried them. She had visited almost every store in the village without finding what she was looking for by the last day, and she was ready to give up and return to the hotel where they were staying when she unexpectedly spotted it. It was a machine for karaoke. It reminded her of the time Hanabi had gone to a karaoke bar with her to hang out with her friends. She purchased the machine and a few CDs so she could have more fun at home because she had so much fun singing in front of everyone that she would keep nagging her to take her back. She recalled how, in spite of her objections, Hanabi pulled her up onto the stage to sing that day at the bar. She then vanished to entice one of the boys to join her and turn it into a duet. While Choji claimed he couldn't eat on an empty stomach, Shikamaru felt the idea was too problematic. Kiba stated that he would only be willing to sing if the song was about someone who let the dogs out, and Hanabi yelled, "No," in his face. When it appeared that she would have to sing by herself, Naruto got up and declared he wasn't scared to sing after a fist was thrown into the air. As they sang, some people covered their ears because Naruto was singing loudly and Hinata was so quiet that she could hardly be heard. Even with the microphone, her shyness took over because so many people were watching her. She became more confident, though, as soon as she felt Naruto's arm around her shoulders and looked up into his blue eyes. By the end of the song, she was laughing and smiling with him, and the audience in front of them began to cheer and applaud. She wanted to see Naruto, which was another reason she was eager to return home. The two had become closer since the day the Akatsuki attacked the village and she almost lost her life defending him. They had begun by saying, "Thank you," and promising to buy her some ramen. Even though it wasn't a date, it was the most enjoyable experience she could recall, and it had brightened her day. The two of them have been spending more time together outside of missions ever since. In addition to spending time together alone, whether it was for training, unwinding with a movie, or eating, they would spend more time together than they did with their other friend. They had never been this close before, and she laughed a little at the absurdity of the idea. If only she had attempted to give her life to save him sooner. In fact, she was going to see him when they returned to the village. She was about to embark on the mission when Naruto finally located her after searching for her all day. He had a broad smile on his face and appeared eager to share something significant with her. However, he ultimately concluded that it would be best to inform her when she got back, as she considered all the things he might want to tell her. Her face darkened, and she kept thinking about the possibility that he might want to confess his feelings for her. However, she was only dreaming, was it not? Unfortunately, the abrupt sound of Akamaru's loud barks jolted her out of her joyful reverie. Kiba yelled to his teammates, "Guys, Akamaru smells someone coming this way fast." Kiba stopped the caravans. A buzzing sound seemed to begin coming from Kiba, so Shino stepped up front with him and asked, "Can you identify who it is yet, Kiba?" The noise would seem odd to those who didn't know him, but his friends know it was the sound of his hive preparing to protect their house from any intruders. As he reached into his weapons pouch and took out a solider pill that would give him a boost if necessary, Kiba called over his shoulder, "No, they're too far out. Hinata, what about you?" Launching herself from the caravan and landing in the space between her teammates, "I'm on it, Byakugan." Her Keke Genkai suddenly came into play, revealing the veins surrounding her eyes as she turned to face the direction Kiba was indicating. 3 figures were there with her. A little brown dog with a blue cape was the first. The second figure was a man with the leaf symbol on his right arm, dressed in black, a ninja vest, pants, and a chunin vest. His head resembled a pineapple due to his black hair tied in a spiky ponytail. When she realized who it was, she released a breath she had been holding and spoke. She looked at the last member of the incoming group and said, "It's okay, it's Shikamaru." She recognized him instantly, and seeing the person she had been thinking about moments before took her breath away and left her speechless. Shino pushed his glasses up his nose and asked, "Who are the other 2 with him?" He turned to Kiba when Hinata failed to respond. He sniffed the air and said, "One's a dog, and the other one's." Suddenly, a haze of orange and black skidded to a halt in front of them, creating a dust cloud. One word came out of Hinata's mouth as the dust began to settle again, allowing the group to see who was in front of them. "Naruto." Kiba yells at Naruto between coughs, "What are you doing? You trying to kill us?" He ignored Kiba and moved in Hinata's direction, focusing on the people in front of him. He grabbed her hand and said, "Hinata, I need you." His voice was so loud that it sounded like he was announcing something to the world. As she gasped for air, her face appeared to be covered in blood. For her, he had traveled this far. She felt herself swoon when he took her hand. He had never held her hand in all the time they had spent together. She thought she might pass out, but a rough voice interrupted her just in time. When Shikamaru eventually caught up to them, the dog said, "Damn it, Naruto, don't just run off like that, and since when did you get so fast that you could outrun me?" Naruto turned to face them and said, "Sorry, Pakun." He had a big smile on his face as he reached back to scratch his neck, but it vanished as soon as he turned back to Hinata. "However, there is an emergency." "Naruto, you were interrupting our mission. Explain to us what this emergency is." Shino spoke up when someone interrupted him while he was on a mission. He never liked it. Before Shino could say anything more, Shikamaru cut him off and gave Kiba a look that made him shut his mouth. "I'll explain later, but for now I'm here to replace Hinata. She needs to go with Naruto." During this time, Naruto drew Hinata near to him and put her arms around him. "Come on, Hinata, we need to get going back to the village. Hold on tight." She felt dizzy from the unexpected embrace. She was in the emergency, which seemed to need her, was the only thing holding her up, aside from the powerful body she felt against hers. However, the intimate touch did not make her blush anymore. Kiba leaned close to Shino as he watched this. He smiled and whispered into his ear, "I bet this is just an excuse for them to spend some alone time together. Did they become a couple and not tell us?" His curiosity was piqued when he saw Naruto wrap his arms around her and begin performing multiple hand seals, so he didn't hear anything Shino had to say back to him. He called to his friend as he approached the final few seals. Then, in a voice that only Hinata could hear, "See you guys at home. I'm sorry." She began to raise her head to see his face. After this snapped her out of her reverie when a big cloud of smoke cleared. Kiba's eyes seemed to be about to pop out of their sockets because his 2 friends had vanished out of thin air. "And Naruto-kun, what are you talking?" He yelled for everyone to hear. "See, I told you they just wanted some alone time." "Be quiet, Kiba, sometimes you can be too troublesome." "About," Hinata concluded, looking up to see nothing but smoke. Her eyes widened as she recognized the surroundings and a calm breeze blew the smoke away as she tried to piece together what had happened. They were outside the Konoha hospital, and she could see the Hokage monument over her shoulder. Somehow, they were back in the Hidden Leaf village. She asks him in wonder, "Naruto-kun, how did we get here?" He grinned down at her and said, "I learned reverse summoning from Fukasaku-sensei when I finished my sage training with him." After everything else they had witnessed him do, it felt good to still be able to surprise in a positive way. Still in awe of what had transpired, she kept looking around. Then she heard his voice once more. "Great, it looks like it's going to start raining soon." She looked up at the sky right away, expecting to see clouds in a darkened sky, but instead she saw what appeared to be a clear blue. It took her a few moments to realize that she was staring at his eyes, which she could gaze at for all eternity, rather than the sky. She was lost in his gaze, trying to figure out why he was so close and staring down at her. When she realized that she still hadn't let go of him even after he had instructed her to hold him, she let him go quickly and turned to face the sky as she saw the storm clouds approaching. Her only thoughts were about how wonderful it felt to be so close to Naruto and how she should cover up her blush. She turned to face him once more, her blush barely contained as she asked, "Yes, and Naruto-kun, it looks like it's going to rain, but what was so important to you that you had to go to such lengths to bring me back?" When he noticed her red face, he immediately dismissed it as one of Hinata's strange tendencies, along with the way she pressed her fingers together, fainted whenever she was near him, and stuttering, which was becoming less frequent. Although he had come to know her much better over the years, there were still some things he didn't think he would ever comprehend as he considered this. A faint grin appeared on his face, but it quickly disappeared and was replaced by a serious expression, unsure of what to say. He opened his mouth to speak but then shut it again. He turned away from her, but instead of going to the Hokage Tower as she had anticipated, he headed toward the hospital's entrance. "It's best if the Hokage explains. Come on, I'll take you to her." Unable to ask any questions, she chased after him and stumbled into a step next to him as they entered the building and headed for the reception area. "Where's the Hokage?" As if to dismiss him, the receptionist simply waved her hand at him. She never once glanced at him during her statement. Lady Tsunade is busy and does not have time to be disturbed. Instead, she kept going through the massive stack of documents in front of her. With a hint of rage in his voice, Naruto growled at her and said, "I have orders from Ba-chan. I've brought Hinata to see her." Had she stopped to look at the person in front of her, she wouldn't have dismissed them so quickly. She discovered the source of the argument by looking up over the piles of papers. She was about to respond when he said something that made sense, so she turned to face the person standing next to him. After bowing her head and giving them instructions to locate the Hokage, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Hyuga Sama, I didn't see you." Hinata started to follow Naruto up the stairs, but she stopped when she heard the receptionist offer her condolences and noticed that she had the same serious expression on her face as Naruto. With a single thought running through her head, she began to ascend the stairs where Naruto was now waiting. What has taken place? The hospital was more silent than she had ever experienced. The man in his bed was breathing heavily, and the only sounds she could hear were the heart monitor beeping to let people know he was still alive, even if only briefly. The sight of his breath condensing in his oxygen mask served to reassure people of this. She had done all she could to support him. He bravely defended his family and the partygoers during the assault. The only wound he sustained was a small cut from a sword on his arm. But he had already defeated multiple foes. Unfortunately, because the blade was poisoned, it was just as lethal as being stabbed in the heart. Tsunade's skill had allowed her to rid his system of the poison, but the damage was already done. His system was about to fail because the poison had been so vicious in its attack on his heart, lungs, and chakra network that the damage was irreparable. Many said that his desire to see his daughters one last time was the reason he hadn't passed away yet. She was startled out of her reverie by a soft knock on the door, and she beckoned the individual inside. Shizune stepped through the open door. She bowed her head and said, "She's arrived, Lady Tsunade." Her voice was even softer than usual. After giving the patient one final glance, Tsunade said, "Good, I guess I should go and try to explain to her what's happened. I want you to stay here and keep watch over him. If anything happens, I want to know immediately." She felt uneasy in the silence. They were sent to the Hokage's hospital office to wait for her after Naruto insisted on knowing her location. As she attempted to piece everything together, Hinata sat on a couch at the side of the room. Lost in thought, everyone she had encountered along the way had either expressed sympathy or remained silent, so she kept trying to figure out what was so urgent that she would be called back from a mission, but it was failing her. She finally decided to just wait for the Hokage, so she looked up from the floor and saw Naruto sitting in the open window, his figure lit by the fading light. She was certain that he knew something. He had asked her if she wanted him to stay with her until Tsunade arrived when they got to the office, and she had immediately said yes. She was hoping that he would tell her what was going on, but she also wanted to spend more time alone with him. He didn't. Rather, he stayed unusually silent while simply gazing out the window, occasionally turning to face her with a worried expression. As she considered approaching Naruto once more, Tsunade went into her office. She bowed to the woman as soon as she entered the room and then started talking. "You wished to see me, Hokage-sama." Her voice seemed unusually concerned. "Yes, Hinata, I don't know what Naruto's told you, but I thought it would be best if it was me that told you." She always considered Tsunade to be a strong woman and leader who could do anything she set her mind to and express her opinions without hesitation. "Naruto hasn't said anything to me, Lady Tsunade. Please tell me what's going on." "If you don't mind, Ba-chan, I think I'll leave you two alone. If you need me, I'll just be outside." Naruto then spoke up. The Hokage nodded, and he gave Hinata a quick look before heading for the door. Naruto-kun, please stay, you know what's going on, please just tell me. He could feel someone squeezing his heart as he looked into her eyes and saw the worry and concern she held. Knowing that what she was about to hear could destroy her, he turned to face Tsunade, who gave him a nod, and walked back to his window seat. The room fell silent once more with their eyes downcast. Hinata sat twitching, waiting to learn what was happening while Naruto and Tsunade considered how best to inform her. Tsunade finally said something. I'm sorry Hinata, but there's no easy way of saying this. Your clan was attacked last night. When Hinata heard this, she looked back at the Hokage in disbelief. Her family and clan had been attacked. She became aware that she was beginning to shake from the shock of the news. As these thoughts were racing through her head, she spoke in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper after taking a deep breath to try to calm herself. What happened? They attacked last night during your sister's birthday party. The attackers were disguised as guests and catering staff. Her voice betrayed concern for her younger sister's safety as she asked, is Hanabi alright? Refusing to look at her, Naruto said, she's fine, Hinata. He didn't know how to help her, but he wanted to. They tried to kidnap her, but me and Kakashi-sensei stopped them before they got out of the village. Then, as Hinata tackled him and buried her head in his chest, he had to hold on to the window frame to keep from falling out of the building. Her words of gratitude for saving her sister were muffled by his jacket, which was getting wet from her tears. He put his arms around her and held her close after he recovered from the shock of her abrupt behavior. As her tears stopped and she composed herself, she clung more tightly to his warm, powerful arms. Seemingly fearful of losing the strength he bestowed upon her, she remained in this position for some time before sitting up and turning to face him. Gomen, she said softly, her cheeks slightly flushed. When he realized that their faces were only a few inches apart, he stammered, that's okay. Not knowing why, Tsunade threw him a box of tissues, and he quickly regained his composure and got up, releasing his grip on her and guiding her back across the room to her seat on the couch. Before asking her next question, Hinata took a tissue from Naruto to wipe away her tears and sat down again, moving closer to him. Why were they attacked? As she began to peruse the various scrolls and documents she had strewn across her desk, Tsunade remarked, I'm afraid we don't know yet. Ibiki and Inoichi are still interrogating Dachi, so we'll have to wait till I get their report. When one of the Hyuga elders was mentioned as being detained for questioning, the heiress asked, bewildered, Dachi? Do you mean Hyuga Dachi Hokage-sama? I'm afraid so. I'm sorry to say that he played a part in the attack. He was caught kidnapping Hanabi, and we also believe that it was with his help that the attack on your clan was success. As her hold on Naruto's jacket tightened once more, she asked, her gaze never leaving the Hokage, what do you mean, he helped with the attack? Her voice trailed off, unsure of how to respond to the next piece of information, until she finally said in a quiet, pained voice, from what we can gather he helped to smuggle the attackers into the village, and he showed them how to activate the caged bird seal. Even though it was spoken quietly, Hinata could hear every word as though it had been yelled into her ear. After processing what she had been told, she struggled to control the tears that began to well up in her eyes before asking in a quieter than usual voice, they're dead, aren't they? They killed my family? As she clung to him once more in an attempt to find solace, Naruto whispered into her ear, I'm sorry, Hinata. Her head abruptly rose from his chest as he held her and ran his hands down her back in an attempt to soothe her. Father? What about father? Naruto's arms tightened around her. He answered, he's still alive. However, Hinata looked into his blue eyes and said the one word he was afraid to say after observing his hesitation and his behavior. But, he's dying, Hinata. Tsunade clarified, during the attack someone poisoned him. I managed to remove the poison from his system, but I'm afraid it's already caused too much damage to his body. I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. She resented herself. She was supposed to be the best medic nin in the world, but all of her knowledge and expertise had ultimately been shown to be in vain. Hinata started crying and sobbed into Naruto's jacket again, the emotion she had been suppressing finally becoming too much. The only sound coming from Hinata sobbing while being held in Naruto's arms caused the room to fall silent once more. Tsunade spoke when she began to relax again. She struggled to finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood what she was implying. This is why we rushed you back, Hinata. He doesn't have much time left and we thought that you'd want to see him once more before. As she broke free of Naruto's grip and stumbled to her feet, Hinata pleaded, please take me to him. After straightening up and nodding in agreement, Tsunade led Hinata out of the room, where she began dragging Naruto with her while she was still unconsciously holding onto his jacket. Tsunade led them through a number of hallways before stopping them outside a single door with two Anbu guards on either side. They stood to attention when they saw their Hokage, but they bowed their heads in sympathy when they saw Hinata. Tsunade pointed down the hall to her sister's room, which also had Anbu guards waiting outside, and told the heiress, "Your father's in here, Hinata. You can go in when you're ready." He's already seen Hanabi, but she took seeing him so badly we had to sedate her. She's in the next room down the hall. Hinata walked over to the door and grabbed the handle as though fearing that she might burn herself. Her hand hesitated and then moved away again, hovering just above it. "Maybe I should go see Hanabi-chan first, or wait till Neji-ni-san returns before I see him." Tsunade put a hand on the girl's shoulder and explained, "Hanabi's asleep, and Neji's on a long-term mission. Even if he could come back it would take him over a week to do so, and by then it'd be too late, I'm afraid." Her voice trembled with anxiety as she said, "Well, maybe I should wait till Hanabi wakes up then and go in with her." When she hesitated to see her father, Naruto, whom she hadn't let go of since they left the Hokage's office, asked, "Hinata, why don't you want to see your father?" She struggled to say, I, as tears began to fall down her cheeks once more. Although her relationship with her father had significantly improved, she still didn't want to let him down by appearing weak. "I don't want him to see me like this. I'm supposed to be strong. I don't want him to see me weak now." Tsunade recognized her anxiety, but she also knew that this was probably her last opportunity to see her father alive. "The way things are, Hinata, I don't think he'll mind." Naruto spun her around so they were facing one another and said, "Come on, Hinata, I know you're strong. Just take a second to calm your nerves, take a deep breath and go in when you're ready. I'll be waiting out here, okay?" She began to relax as she gazed into his eyes, losing herself in his gaze and not initially paying attention to what he was saying. However, her panic returned as soon as she heard him say that he would be waiting outside and felt his hold loosen. She then clung to him so tightly that her fingernails began to pierce his flesh. "No, I can't do this. Will you come with me, Naruto-kun?" He was taken aback by her abrupt inquiry and responded, "Are you sure you want me to?" She confirmed that she didn't trust her voice at the moment by nodding her head. After a moment, he said, "Okay, then I'll go with you, and I'll stay with you as long as you need me." His slight smile gave her more courage. He guided her slowly back to the door and grasped the handle. Her nails began digging into him once more as he turned the handle, and her expression of fear intensified as she realized what was waiting for her behind the door. The door finally opened after what seemed like an eternity, and Naruto ushered her inside. However, she stopped restraining him after a few steps. Even though she had been expecting what she saw, the sight of it still made her freeze where she was. Her father, Hyuga Hiashi, was lying in the lone bed in a white hospital gown. Although his brow was furrowed and perspiration was streaming down his face, he appeared to be sleeping. A medic was cleaning his face next to him. She turned to face them after placing the cloth in the bowl next to her, and Hinata recognized her right away as Shizune, the Hokage's assistant. As Hinata gently pushed her farther into the room to enter herself and shut the door behind her, Tsunade asked over her shoulder, "How's he doing, Shizune?" She turned to Hinata with a sorrowful expression, while Hinata had the expression of a lost child. "I'm afraid he hasn't improved, Lady Tsunade. His vitals have been slowly dropping. I don't know how long he'll last." Shizune went on, "There is some good news though, my lady. Lord Hiashi, he's..." A fresh voice called out, "Awake!" As everyone turned to face the bed, Hiashi was staring back at them. His arms failed him as he attempted to sit up, and he collapsed back into the bed. The medic nins who were there swiftly gathered around him, helped him settle into pillows to support his back, and gave him a drink of water to soothe his dry throat before stepping back to give him some room. He gestured for Hinata to approach while rolling his head to get rid of the cramps. She walked slowly over to the bed and sat down beside it, Naruto, whose hand she had finally released, standing behind her. "How are you, Odo-sama?" His lips formed a tiny smile that surprised her. She could only recall a few instances in which she had witnessed him smile, and even then, it had always occurred in the seclusion of the Hyuga compound and had lasted only a moment before his characteristic stony gaze returned. "I am as well as can be expected considering the circumstances, daughter. Is there anything I can do for you, Odo-sama?" As she said those words, a smile spread across his face. "No, there is not, but I do wish to hear how you are doing." She said nothing she didn't anticipate being asked, but she felt her father would not approve of the real response, so she did the only thing she could think of: tell a lie. She wanted to speak in a firm voice to conceal the fact that she was lying, but all that came out of her mouth was sadness. "I am fine, Odo-sama." It also didn't help that she was a horrible liar. Her father's smile disappeared in an instant. "Do not disrespect me, Hinata, by lying to me." He turned to the other people who had been quietly waiting in the room, and she winced at what he had said. "Leave us, I wish for us to speak in private." Despite his condition, there was no room for argument in the tone of his voice, but when Hinata grabbed Naruto's jacket as he turned to go, he decided to try. "I'm staying," Shizune gasped, and Tsunade's forehead grew conceited. Both of them had stopped in the middle of leaving the room. Although they were aware of Naruto's tendency toward stubbornness, neither of them anticipated that he would turn down a dying man's request. With a stern expression that had previously sent both allies and enemies reeling, Hiashi asked, "Would you please explain why you refuse to leave us alone?" He stood erect with his arms folded across his chest, seemingly daring Hiashi to challenge him. "I'll only leave if Hinata wants me to. I promised her I'd be here if she needed me, and I don't go back on my word." Hinata was self-disappointed and felt weak. If it had been anyone else, she would have assured them she was fine and attempted to handle things on her own, but she wanted Naruto to stay, and it wasn't just anyone. She thought that perhaps, with him by her side, she would have the strength to go on. Despite her quiet voice, everyone could hear her say, "Please Odo-sama, I would like him to say." The Hyuga head's face displayed a smirk, another expression that people hardly ever use. However, it was humorous rather than haughty. Then, another unexpected event occurred. He chuckled. It began as a little, quiet chuckle and soon expanded into a burst of laughter in their minds. He was doing the impossible, and everyone stood staring at him in awe. Never before had such a normally stony man shown so much emotion. When he began coughing uncontrollably, their surprise quickly gave way to concern, and the Hokage and her assistant hurried across the room to check on him. When his cough finally subsided, he waved them away and said, "No, I'm okay. He may stay if you wish him to. Then now the rest of you please leave us." Before leaving the room with Shizune right behind her, Tsunade said, "We'll be outside. If you need us, just call." She took one last glance at the people in the room and the monitor next to the bed that displayed Hiashi's statistics. Making a gesture for Hinata to approach him, he settled back into his bed. The room fell silent as she reluctantly drew her chair closer to his bed and Naruto moved away from her to sit in the window across the room. "I'm sorry, daughter." She took in what had just been said. She was certain he would want to discuss a lot of things, but she wasn't anticipating an apology. Why are you apologizing, Odo-sama?" The memories returned to him, and he inhaled deeply. "I'm sorry for the way I treat you when you were younger. When your mother died, I wasn't sure how to cope, so I buried myself in dealing with the clan. I tried to make the clan stronger to hide the fact that I felt so weak, and that's why I pushed you. A strong clan needed a strong heir, so I did everything I could to make you that." She recalled the lengthy classes on equity, diplomacy, and clan laws, as well as the even more drawn-out, challenging, and agonizing sessions on using the gentle fist. She winced at the mere notion of this and encircled herself with her arms, seemingly in an attempt to shield herself from her traumatic past. Despite seeing this, Hiashi went on. "But you would stumble and stutter, and you seemed incapable of mastering even the basics of our fighting style. So when I finally felt you were no longer up to the task as heir, I simply pushed you away and focused on your sister. I mistreat you because I felt you were weak." Her eyes began to burn with tears. Once more she had detested herself for her previous frailties. She had believed that these issues had been resolved between them after their previous conversation, but it felt like she was 12 again when she heard him talk about her past failures. His smile reappeared as he said, "But eventually you proved me wrong. All I ever saw was your weak body. I never realized that under it you held such a strong spirit." A single tear fell down his cheek as he opened up to his daughter, reflecting on all the chances he had lost and the parallels between his late wife and his oldest daughter. "The same spirit as your mother, Kami. You'll never know how much you're like her." Hinata got out of her chair and put her arms around him, hugging him before she realized what she was doing. Although they had become closer, Hiashi tensed up beneath her embrace. They hardly ever made physical contact, and she was too exhausted to pull away as soon as she felt him stiffen. Uncertain of his reaction, however, she was pleasantly surprised when she felt him relax into his embrace and put his own arms around her. "I know I've said this all before to you, but I really am sorry for the way I treat you. I can never make up for everything I put you through in the past, but I had hoped I could try to make it up to you in the future." The grin on his face acknowledged the things he was going to miss. "I wanted to see you grow up to become clan head and then see both you and Hanabi find yourself a husband and have children." In order to conceal the blush that surfaced when she considered her choice of husband, Hinata turned away from her father and turned toward the door. By this time Hiashi's gaze, meanwhile, strayed to Naruto, who was keeping an eye on his daughter. Naruto. When Hiashi mentioned marriage, the blonde, who had been considering his own future, abruptly stopped thinking about it and looked at the man in bed. "Hi Hiashi-sama? I also wish to apologize to you as well for the way you were treated when you were younger. While I never did anything to you myself, I never stopped others when I saw them, and that makes me just as responsible for your pain as them." Naruto had never experienced this before. He was aware of individuals who had previously mistreated him and subsequently behaved differently toward him. However, very few had truly expressed regret to him. Instead, they chose to act as though nothing had occurred. Observing the shocked expression on his face from the praise, Hiashi went on, "Despite what you've been through, you have grown up to become a strong and honorable man just like your father, and I'm sure he would be proud." The mention of the clan seemed to weaken his voice as he said, I also want to thank you for helping make our clan better. After your match with Neji, your actions in the fight highlighted the problems we had and helped us to start to become a family again. Over time we became both closer and stronger because of your actions. He smiled broadly but sincerely at the other two people in the room, feeling embarrassed to be thanked for helping someone. It was no problem. Hinata's one of my precious people and I'd do anything to help make them, and make sure they're safe and happy. Helping others was as natural to him as breathing. In spite of everything that had been going on, Hinata couldn't resist giving him a smile in return before covering her face once more regardless of the circumstance. Naruto always seemed to bring out the best in her. Hiashi's solemn voice pierced the room, drawing everyone's attention, particularly the aforementioned blonde, who gave him a questioning glance. Naruto, I have a request for you. Sure, what is it? The final part of his statement was muttered softly, but the two teenagers listening could hear the anguish and sorrow of the death in his voice. The village law states that Hinata is unable to assume the role of clan head until she reaches the age of 21, though there isn't a clan to lead anymore. Therefore both she and Hanabi will be made by the village elders to be cared for by a guardian until Hinata is old enough to inherit her birthright. Naruto responded, that stupid Hinata's old and capable enough to take care of herself. However, he was cut off before he could finish. I wish for you to be their guardian. He opened his mouth to speak when he heard this, but nothing came out. Hinata looked between the two men in disbelief that her father would ask of such a thing, while he was only able to make a very realistic impression of a fish. As you said, Hinata is fully capable of taking care of both herself and her sister, but the village elders will simply not acknowledge her as a clan head because she's female. Bewildered, Naruto questioned, why can girls only do so at 21 while boys can at 13? He didn't understand why Sarutobi Konohamaru, who had turned 13 a year earlier, had been given the opportunity to serve in his clan. The elder had used this to inform him that he was now formally acknowledged as the Sarutobi clan's leader. However, he declined the offer, stating that he wasn't yet prepared for such a responsibility. Hiashi told Naruto, who didn't seem happy with his response, I'm afraid it's double standards. While most clans wait till their heirs are 18 years old, there's an old law from when the village was first founded that said no female could become clan head until the age of 21. I honestly don't know why this is the case, and previous attempts in the past to change this law have always failed. Before he spoke again, there was a pause while Naruto considered the request. What would I have to do as their guardian? Both teenagers grinned at this recognition. There is very little you have to do. As you said, Hinata is fully capable of taking care of herself and her sister. Officially, people will expect you to make the decisions as if you were the clan head. Naruto started to say, but was cut off, but I believe you can leave that to Hinata and act as her advisor instead and be her voice in the council meetings outside of clan matters. I just want you to make sure that they stay safe. He looked into Hiashi's face to get confirmation. So basically you want me to pretend that I'm in charge and make sure they stay safe and help them if they need it? He asked. That is correct. The blonde grinned broadly, and he burst out laughing as everyone in the room looked at him, trying to figure out what he was laughing at. He made the decision to explain his laughter after he had calmed down. Gomen, I didn't mean to laugh, but it just seems funny what you're asking me to do. Behind her hand, Hinata concealed a tiny smile brought on by Naruto's actions. She knew what he meant pretty well. Hiashi, meanwhile, kept staring in confusion. Before he began to cough, he asked, would you care to explain? Naruto spoke while waiting for him to calm down. It's just, he said as he got up from his window seat and walked around the bed to stand next to Hinata. He put an arm over her shoulder and gave her a warm embrace, which still made her flush. Well, you're asking me to do something that I do for any of my friends without being asked, so it just seems silly, really. After that, the two men carried on discussing the specifics of what he would need to do. Hinata would respond when asked, but she mostly kept quiet. Thoughts of what it would be like to have Naruto more involved in her life filled her mind as she lost herself in his warm embrace, barely even listening to their conversation. When she heard her father mention suitors, she abruptly woke up from her reverie. She glanced around the room, trying to find out what was being said, and was about to ask when the Hokage poked her head around the door and there was a slight knock. Sorry to intrude, but I just wanted to check and see how you're doing. As Tsunade examined him, Hiashi replied, I am fine. I actually wanted to speak to you about an important matter. As she waited for him to continue, she paused her checks and looked at him curiously. Before he started coughing again, he told everyone listening, I wish to formally make Uzumaki Naruto the legal guardian of my daughters till Hinata comes of age where she can lead the Hyuga clan. Tsunade gave him a startled look as she looked back at him. Perhaps she misheard him. She thought about the man in front of her to validate her error, but she couldn't find any answers with a look in his eyes that told her she had heard correctly and he was serious. Hiashi simply returned her gaze as he always did. Her gaze shifted from the clan head to her fellow blonde, who returned the smile, clearly proud that someone would entrust him with something so significant without considering him to be the child of prophecy or the village's last hope. As she processed the new information, her gaze shifted back and forth between the two men like a tennis ball. Eventually, it settled on the heiress, who was leaning her head against Naruto's shoulder and watching him with a slight flush on her cheeks. She gave Hiashi a brief smile as she turned to face him in bed before continuing. "You sure you want this Gaki to be responsible for your children?" Standing directly in front of the Hokage, Naruto yelled, "Hey," and made eye contact with her, silently challenging her to repeat the phrase in an attempt to prove that she could defeat him with a single finger. Similar to their first-time altercation, Tsunade held up her hand with one finger pointing upward. He was always willing to take on the challenge. Not this time, though. When he felt someone tug on his sleeve, he looked down to see Hinata looking back, breaking eye contact with the woman in front of him. Instead, he was frozen in place by the worried expression she gave him. He took a deep breath, stepped back from the woman, and muttered an apology as he returned to his seat on the window ledge. Tsunade's mouth was hanging open as she looked at him in astonishment. She was aware that Naruto and Hinata had improved each other's lives because of their close relationship, but she was unaware of how well Hinata could soothe him normally. Sakura would need to strike him in the head to defuse the situation. She returned her focus to the man in bed as he cleared his throat, and the expression on his face perplexed her once more. After seeing the scene in front of him, he felt a mixture of annoyance and amusement. He continued speaking after he was certain he had everyone's attention. He gave Naruto a slight nod before adding, in a voice that only Tsunade could hear, "Even though he can be a Gaki, as you call him, he is still a strong and honorable ninja who cares for anyone he deems precious to him and would be willing to do anything for them even at the risk of his own life. That is the kind of person I want looking out for my daughters. I also have a feeling that this may be especially true in the case of Hinata." Her voice grew playful, and her smile widened. "You know the way you make it sound, it's almost as if you'd be willing to have the knucklehead marry your daughter." In the instant that followed, the two teenagers' gazes briefly met again before averting their gazes with a tomato-red face. Hinata gazed at her feet. Although she was aware that others were aware of her feelings for the blonde, she felt utterly ashamed that someone would bring up something she would dream about all night long in front of her father. Unaware that the window was unlocked, Naruto leaned against it after turning away so forcefully to conceal his own darkened face as he fell backwards. The window swung open with his entire weight behind it. With a brief cry of terror, he frantically grasped the ledge. Hinata looked up when she heard the sudden noise, and as she watched him vanish out the window, the color left her face. She leapt to her feet and hurried over to him, snatching his hand and attempting to draw him back in while he was hanging outside. Tsunade drew nearer to Hiashi as the scene played out in front of them. She said in a whisper that only he could hear, "You know, don't you?" As his daughter pulled the boy she loved back into the room, he pulled her into an embrace and thanked her, causing the sides of his lips to curl up. The two teenagers appeared absorbed in their conversation, oblivious to the presence of others in the room. As he said, "Yes, I am aware, though I'm not too sure that they both realize it yet." Naruto complimented Hinata, telling her that she always seemed to be there when he needed help, as Hiashi tried to listen to them. After exchanging one last glance, Tsunade stepped away from the bed as Hiashi determined it was time for the other two to calm down. "Are you both finished yet?" Their faces darkened in embarrassment as they both turned to face him, suddenly remembering where they were. Hi Oto-sama." Naruto decided he had tempted fate enough for today and stood directly behind Hinata as she went back to her chair at her father's bedside. Once they were settled, Tsunade said calmly, "Good, as Hokage I will recognize Uzumaki Naruto as the guardian of Hyuga. Hinata and Hanabi, I'll get someone to bring the paperwork over immediately for you to sign to make it official." Naruto tried to cover his ears as soon as he saw her take a deep breath, but it was too late because she yelled a single name in a voice so loud that it woke everyone who was sleeping in Suna. "Shizune." As Hinata shielded her ears, Naruto was certain he saw the walls vibrate, but as the head of the Hyuga clan, Hiashi never even batted an eye at the sudden volume, displaying the poise and control for which he was renowned. In the meantime, there were hurried footsteps coming down the corridor. The noise grew louder and louder until it reached the door, at which point Shizune dashed into the room and skidded to a halt, closely followed by Taunton, Tsunade's pet pig. "In between pants," she said, "You called my lady?" Naruto whispered in Hinata's ear while leaning over her shoulder. After hearing the remark, Tsunade turned to face them, but all she saw was the two of them staring at her with straight faces. "If that's calling, I'd hate to be around when she shouts." She let out a little giggle. She turned back to Shizune, eyeing them suspiciously, but she never saw Hinata suppress another laugh or Naruto stick his tongue out at her. "I need you to get me a copy of guardianship forms and bring them back here as quickly as possible." Does this mean Lord Hiashi has chosen someone Lady Tsunade? She said, somewhat sarcastically, because she still thought the idea was amusing. Yes, Hiashi in all his wisdom has decided that the future of the Hyuga should be left in the capable hands of Naruto. Stunned by his choice of guardian, Shizune turned to face the man in the bed. Are you sure? I mean, I believe in him, but is he really the best choice for this? Wouldn't someone like Kurenai be better suited? Naruto's perspiration fell. Does no one have any faith in me? Over her shoulder, Hinata timidly said, I have faith in you, Naruto-kun. He smiled back, feeling uplifted by her brief remarks. I assure you I've thought about this very carefully. While I believe Yuhi Kurenai would be a good choice for the role, she now has her own child to look after who will take up much of her own time. Hiashi continued, ignoring the outburst. And while Naruto may be rough around the edges, I am sure he'll do what's in the best interests of my daughters. Also, dealing with our clan's politics should help him with his other new role. While Shizune turned on her heels and hurried out of the room, Hinata looked at her father, perplexed by his last remark, but she decided not to question it. She brought the documents back 10 minutes later, and while posing as a witness, she saw Naruto and Hiashi sign them. After that, Tsunade took the form and checked it one last time before putting her seal on it. Hiashi declared, "It's done." Then he started coughing again, prompting Hinata to check on him once more. When Tsunade put the documents securely in her robe, she remarked, "Yes, it is. I just hope you realize how serious your responsibilities are." He raked his hands through his hair in exasperation and said, "Look, I know I've done some stupid things in the past, but when it's something important I always take it seriously. They may claim to trust him, but that wasn't the impression he was currently receiving from them." With his voice raspy from coughing, Hiashi stated, "Since the matter of my daughter's guardian has been sorted, I wish to speak with Hinata alone now." Tsunade attempted to lead Naruto out with her, but he resisted, so Shizune left the room instead. He turned to face Hinata and asked her a silent question, which made Hinata smile for the world to see. The woman shook her head and said, "Thank you, Naruto-kun, but I'll be fine." She was about to turn back to her father when she felt a pair of arms encircle her waist and draw her in. She was taken aback and looked up into stunning blue eyes that assured her he would always be there to support her. She laid her head on his chest and he laid his on top of hers as they relaxed. He whispered to her, "I'm sorry." She put her own arms around her father tightly and thanked him again. Rubbing her face against his chest to wipe away her tears, she was determined to remain strong in front of her father. They eventually parted after a short while, and she watched Naruto walk out of the room as they nodded to one another. She turned to her father and took a deep breath to gather herself before returning to her seat and waiting for him to say something. Before he spoke, he initially just observed her as though assessing her. "He's important to you, isn't he?" She had not anticipated this. She believed he wanted to discuss either the need for her and her sister to repopulate the clan or the importance of maintaining the clan's honor and customs. She wasn't expecting this, even though she was relieved that she wasn't asked the latter. "He's important to me?" she asked again, checking that she understood and stuttering, which made her cringe inwardly as her father kept staring at her and waiting. She pressed her index fingers together in an attempt to come up with a response. "Yes, Odo-sama, he is important to me." "How so?" was her prompt response to the query. "I have the utmost respect for him. When I felt weak, he was the one who gave me strength. He would sacrifice himself for me, and I would do the same for him." Despite all of these thoughts, she was unable to find the courage to tell her father, "He is the person that I love." At last, she responded, He's one of my precious people, just as I am one of his." Hiashi shook his head and began to laugh. "That's not answering my question." She finally stated, "He is important to me. When I was younger, he was everything I wanted to be. He was strong and confident. He never let what people said about him hold him back. If anything, it would make him more determined, and when he failed, he always got back up to try again. When I had to face Neji Ni-san in the Chunin exams, I was so afraid and unsure of my skills I was ready to forfeit." She looked up to her dad with a grin on her face and tears in her eyes. She chuckled to herself as she recalled his irritation at Naruto serving as her personal cheerleader. "And then I heard his voice. He told me to ignore what Neji was saying, that I was strong and I could beat him. He gave me the confidence to see the fight through, and even though I lost, I felt better about myself thanks to him." Hiashi listened to her without saying anything. This was the first time she had really opened up to him. Even though they had grown closer, he saw that she was always smiling as she talked. "When he left with Jiraiya-sama to train, I was so upset to see him leave, but I made myself a promise. I promised myself that I would get stronger so I could stand by his side instead of watching him from the shadows when he returned, to cheer him on when he succeeded and help him up when he got knocked down. I want to always be there for him because I love him." As she said the final few words, which were so quiet that they were hardly audible, her eyes returned to the ground. Nearly looking out the window, she watched the rain begin to fall. If that is how you truly feel about him, why do you not tell him? She asked. Because I'm still not strong enough. Even though he lets me stand by his side, I'm still not worthy of him. Says who? She turned to face her father and noticed that his eyes were now gentle and compassionate instead of icy and hard as they had been in the past. You've made great progress over the past several years. You have more than proven yourself as a ninja as well as a loyal friend to Naruto. When you stood alone against pain to protect him is more than enough proof of that. Before continuing, he paused to allow his daughter to process what he had said. As for your feelings for him, telling him is a leap of faith that must always happen when it comes to matters of the heart. All you can do is be truthful and hope that he's able to reciprocate your feelings. She began to say, but what if, but was stopped when she noticed her father's exhausted expression at last. The mask he had been wearing to conceal the pain he was experiencing came off, revealing to her the extent of his suffering. His breathing became labored as he coughed and said, Hinata, I want you to do something for me. Unable to speak because she could see how much pain he was in, she nodded back. His voice grew progressively weaker as he said, if your feelings for him are genuine and he is what you want for your future, you must tell him. Take your time and wait till you are ready, but you must tell him. If you don't, you will only live to regret it. Speaking as firmly as she could, she stated, Hyuga-sama, I am sure about him and I will tell him. She knew exactly what she wanted, but she wasn't sure if she would ever have the guts to go for it. I've just realized something. Tsunade glanced at the boy who had just spoken. On the other side of the room they hadn't left the Hyuga head and heiress alone for almost an hour. Tsunade had returned to wait with Naruto outside the hospital room after Shizune had been called away to assist in the hospital and check on Hanabi. Go on then, Gaki, I'll bite. Her remark caused a smug look to appear on his forehead, but he chose to ignore it. I think I'd rather be stuck in a hospital bed than waiting out here. She tried in vain to contain her laughter as she remarked, you would rather be in a hospital bed? Ever since I've known you, we've had to send out search parties to find you because you're always sneaking out. He pouted, upset that she thought his observation was hilarious. Well, if you just give me ramen instead of that disgusting stuff that you masquerade as food, then maybe I wouldn't have to sneak out. As she controlled her laughter, the Hokage began, that's because, when you're in hospital you never listen to us when we tell you to rest. You're always active trying to escape, but when you're visiting you can't do anything but wait and provide support and keep the patient company. As Tsunade considered another idea, Naruto nodded in agreement. Or in your case you're here to help the person visiting the patient. It was accurate. He tried to talk to Hiashi, but he didn't know him well enough to think he would enjoy sharing a room. He had no choice but to fulfill his pledge to care for his daughters. However, he could assist them, particularly Hinata. The two had spent a great deal of time together and had learned a great deal about one another following the Akatsuki invasion and the war with Madara. Even though he still didn't understand why she would only blush or stutter around him, something he noticed was happening less and less. He was aware that she still had a strong bond with her family despite her past. To force Shikamaru to catch up, he set out to find her before Tsunade even gave the order. Jiraiya was like a grandfather to him, and the fact that he was never able to say goodbye to him before he passed away still pained him. He would do everything in his power to give Hiashi the chance he was never given. If she couldn't be saved, he would help her in any way he could. You're thinking about her again, aren't you? He turned back to face his fellow blonde and asked, what? You're thinking of Hinata. Every time you do you get a look in your eye, and that smile, it's different. She's more than just a friend to you, isn't she? His cheeks began to flush as he said, I've got no idea what you're talking about. The idea that there was more going on between the two of them wasn't unique to Tsunade. However, they were only friends at Euro, close friends, but friends nonetheless, correct? Both of them turned to see who it was when they heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Before Tsunade could say anything more, Tsunade was perplexed by the fact that she was speaking to Shizune, even though it turned out that she was returning from duty. Naruto was still sitting in his chair when she turned to look at the seat in front of her, wondering if he had just rushed to meet her to make sure she wasn't seeing things. She turned to face the approaching couple, but the blonde was still walking alongside the assistant. The new Naruto called out, here you go, boss. He threw a bottle of water, which his double caught, and then abruptly vanished in a cloud of smoke. She wanted to smash her head against a brick wall because she didn't realize what had happened sooner. When? She inquired confused. He asked back, when what? When did you make the cage bunshin? He took a mouthful of his drink and said, oh, that I did it when you had to go deal with those doctors earlier. I was thirsty, but I didn't want to leave in case Hinata needed me, so I sent the bunshin instead. It ran into Shizune on the way back and decided to keep her company. She was among those who said, you know, some people envy your ability to make so many bunshins to do your jobs for you. She could have the Bunchins handle her paperwork and free up more time for other essential tasks if she had the chakra capacities similar to sipping sake. "How's Hyuga-sama's condition, Lady Tsunade?" inquired Shizune. She started to get up and said, "I'm not sure, I haven't heard anything from them since we left. I should probably go and check on them." Naruto took another mouthful of water and walked to the door, saying, "It's okay, I'll go. If they need you guys I'll come back and get you. I wanted to check on Hinata anyway." He missed the exchange of glances between the two older women as he opened the door, both of them questioning whether he would ever realize how much he cared for the girl. However, the sound of profanity emanating from the room snapped both of them out of their reverie. As they hurried into the room to look into what had happened, they saw Orange jump out of the open window into the rainy, dark night. They saw two significant things as they surveyed the space. The first was Hiashi's motionless body, lying in bed with his eyes closed and a serene expression on his face. The strong and proud leader of the Hyuga clan had died, as evidenced by the strangely silent heart monitor next to him that showed no heartbeat. Without a doubt, the second was the cause of Naruto's abrupt absence. The room was empty of other people. There was no Hinata. Her jacket folded over the back of the bedside chair was the only indication that she had been there at all. Tsunade made Hiashi look out over the village while Shizune covered her motionless form with a sheet. The rain was falling heavily and the sky was dark, as though it were trying to erase the memories of the previous few days. All she could feel was sadness as she observed those below her attempting to stay dry. "I'm sorry for the suffering. We are saddened by the lives lost." She was even more saddened by the girl who had lost her family after battling for their acceptance for the majority of her life. Run was the only thing that came to mind. Why she was running was a mystery to her. Was it the death of her Otou-san or the fact that there was nothing she could do to save him? She was aware that the answer was both, but as soon as her Otou-san made that request, she knew she wanted to run. She was so terrified to be asked to do this that she jumped out of the hospital window into the rain in a panic when he eventually passed away. She realized she had forgotten her jacket once she was out of the hospital, but she didn't care. She didn't mind the rain causing her clothes to stick to her or the wind tearing at her skin. Her only goal was to put as much distance as possible between herself and the hospital. She sprinted past crowded bars and eateries, her feet hammering the floor. She turned away when she noticed a man leaving a restaurant with two small children who were laughing and chatting. She was painfully reminded of what she had lost out on as a child and what she would never have again with her Otou-san. When she saw the three of them together with greater resolve, she abandoned them, oblivious to a young girl naively pointing at her and asking her father why she was running in the rain without a coat. Her vision became blurry as the rain continued to fall, and she reached up to wipe the tears from her eyes. It wasn't until it was too late that she saw a man stumble out of a bar and they collided. She stopped herself before she hit the ground thanks to her ninja instincts, and she kept running without missing a step. But the drunkard was not so lucky. He bumped into Hinata and then fell back into the bar from which he had come, spilling the drinks of several patrons and starting a fight. Usually, she would stop to apologize and make sure the person was okay if she bumped into them. However, she never considered the idea. Running was all she wanted to do. Before she eventually slipped on the damp ground and fell at an intersection on the outskirts of the village, she had no idea how long she had been running. As her adrenaline rush finally subsided, she collapsed back onto her knees while attempting to stand. She looked around to try to figure out where she was because she didn't have the energy to stand. There was a single old oak tree on the corner of the wooden fences that encircled the roadside. Her team would get together there before heading out on missions. When she realized this and pondered why she had chosen to run there, a tiny smile briefly appeared on her face before it swiftly vanished. Why she ran there was irrelevant. She just wanted to avoid the pain as much as she could. She let the rain fall on her while shaking her head and gazing up at the sky. She hoped the rain would help wash away the pain as it mixed with her tears and fell on her face. A wish she knew would never be fulfilled. He complained to himself about his failure to locate her, saying, "This is ridiculous." The first thing he saw when he walked into the hospital room was Hiashi's motionless body, and even though he hadn't checked him, he was certain he was dead. The next thing he saw was Yuro. And the most concerning to Yuro was that Hinata was not there, and the window was open. He jumped out the window to find her because he was worried about her safety and knew she hadn't left through the door. He had no idea why she had vanished after her father passed away. She might have fled. Perhaps she fled in fear because witnessing his death was too much for her. The alternative was far worse. So he hoped this was the case. She might have been abducted. Perhaps they had returned to complete the task because they had missed someone from the last attack. They had the option to sneak in through the window, kill Hiashi, and take Hinata away. Naruto quickened his pace at the mere notion of this. If so, the enemy would have been able to accomplish all of this without creating any noise to warn people outside the room and without leaving any indication of a struggle. All of these were indicators of a very good ninja. He disregarded common sense, which advised him to seek assistance from Tsunade in order to locate her, particularly if she had been abducted. He wasn't going to sit around and do nothing because Hinata wasn't there. She would have needed assistance if she had been abducted, and he was always there to support his friends. Finding Hinata was all that mattered to Naruto. She goes to Kurenai when she wants to talk to someone, but I believe she is on a mission. She gets cinnamon rolls when she's craving comfort food. Unfortunately, at this time, all bakeries will be closed. However, they would immediately leave the village if she were abducted, as he desperately searched for Hinata. All of these ideas and more raced through his mind. Or perhaps they'd try returning to the Hyuga compound since that Dachi guy was helping them. He made a number of cage bunchins to aid in his search as soon as he left the hospital, but they were of no use. The bunchins who had scattered only informed him that they had not discovered anything, and he was aware that none of them would go missing to inform him if they had located her. To ensure she wouldn't be abandoned, they would remain with her. He saw a group of guards escorting a number of people away as he passed one of the many bars in the village. Naruto paused to inquire if they had spotted Hinata or anything fishy nearby. They shook their heads and said that they would spare whoever they could to help him look, but that they had been too busy resolving bar fights all night. Thanking them, he left the drunken rambling behind and left them alone. He didn't notice a man lying in the gutter singing a song about drinking sake, bar fights, and the girl with the dark blue hair who started it all. The rain had intensified and the night had grown darker 20 minutes after he began his search. He worried more and more about Hinata's safety with every second that went by, until at last the anxiety became unbearable. He halted in the middle of the road and yelled at the sky, blaming them for all that had transpired. He inhaled deeply to soothe his nerves as he stood in the faint light of a single lamp post. He was about to make more cage bunchin to aid in the search when a sudden rumble of thunder and a flash of lightning lit up the sky, as if the heavens were responding to his outburst. He felt a little calmer and raised his hands in front of him in a familiar seal. Certain that he had heard something, he halted his jutsu and glanced around the area once more. All he could see when he looked in the direction he believed he heard the noise was the damp road stretching off into the distance before being engulfed by the night's darkness when another lightning strike swept across the sky, briefly illuminating the area. He gave up on the mystery noise and rehearsed his jutsu. Then he heard the sound once more. It sounded like someone yelling. He searched for the source of the scream again, and using the lightning's brief illumination, he was able to make out the shape of a person sitting in the center of the road in front of him. Naruto moved forward to check on the person as it vanished into the night. As he approached, he saw that the individual was a young woman with long, dark, damp hair that was clinging to her back. She screamed again after another lightning strike, and he started running as soon as he saw her lilac-tinted, white eyes and instantly recognized the person. Hinata. Despite the stinging pain in her eyes from crying, she looked around for the source of the breath that caught in her throat at the sound of his voice. The familiar shape of Naruto, dressed in black and orange, emerged from the shadows and approached her. He had come to look for her. He was concerned enough to search for her in the storm. She would have appreciated his actions at any other time, but she didn't want to see him right now. All she wanted to do was flee. Her instincts to flee took over as he approached, and she turned to flee after struggling to stand on unsteady legs. But after taking 2 steps, her legs failed her and she fell to the ground again. Naruto was by her side as soon as she hit the ground, attempting to ensure her safety. Hinata, are you okay?" he inquired, scanning her for any indications of harm but failing to spot any in the shadows. When she didn't answer, he said it again, shaking her gently, and all he heard was her sobbing. "Hinata." He put his arms around her and tried to comfort her by hugging her tightly because he didn't want to watch her cry. Hinata instantly put her own arms around him. The 2 teenagers simply sat in the middle of the road, holding each other, for the next few minutes as Naruto held her close to his chest and made calming noises to help her process the pain and sadness. Hinata sobbed into his jacket. She eventually stopped crying and withdrew from the hug, allowing them to gaze into each other's eyes. He looked at her tear-stained cheeks and swollen eyes and asked, "Feeling better?" She wiped her arm across her face to wipe away her tears and said, "Hi arigato Naruto-kun." Naruto helped her stand up again and began guiding her to a place where she could escape the rain before they could get to any thoughts. The sky erupted in thunder once more, and the village was once more illuminated by a lightning strike. Hinata screamed again and collapsed back to the ground, pulling Naruto, whom she was still clutching, onto her. Astonished by her response, he glanced at her again to check on her, only to notice that his face was only a few inches from hers. He blushed slightly as he quickly rolled off her after realizing the precarious situation the two were in, but as soon as he looked at her again, the blush quickly gave way to a worried and concerned expression. Hinata rolled into a tight ball as soon as he left her, and she began to sob and shake again. Another lightning strike occurred as he extended his hand to console her, and she screamed once more as she flinched away from his touch. Even though she was already drenched, He removed his jacket and wrapped it around her in an attempt to keep her dry after realizing that she wouldn't be able to go very far in her current state. When Hinata felt herself being wrapped up, she froze for a moment before grabbing the jacket's edges and drawing it closer to her body to stay warm. When she smelled the ramen from it, she rubbed it against her face to wipe away more tears. It was the distinct aroma of Naruto. She began to relax again after taking a deep breath of his reassuring scent, but as soon as she felt herself being lifted, she began to panic. Glancing around, she noticed that she was traversing the village's rooftops. When she turned to face the person carrying her, she saw that Naruto was holding her in a bridal fashion. He grinned sadly as she put her arms around his shoulders and he looked down at her. She was taken aback by another lightning strike and buried her face in his chest once more, only to hear him say, "Let's get you." As he continued to jump across Konoha, Naruto simply held her closer. He took the key to his apartment out of his trouser pocket while holding her in one arm, once again supporting her with both arms. He found it, unlocked the door, and pushed it open with his back. After kicking the door shut, he walked through his dimly lit apartment, set her down on his couch, and then turned on the light, waking her from her reverie. "Where are we?" "My place," was his response as he moved into another room. Hinata surveyed the area from the sofa. Since Naruto left to train with Jiraiya, she had not been in his apartment for years. She frequently visited with Sakura to water his plants and ensure the place remained clean while he was away for her. It was a way to stay near him no matter where he was, even though most people saw it as supporting a friend. Since then, the location had evolved. The majority of the village needed to be rebuilt after Pain's attack destroyed it. As a small token of appreciation for what he did, Tsunade had the walls of the two apartments next to his apartment building demolished and remodeled to give him more space after his apartment building was rebuilt. She recalled him telling her with excitement that his one-room apartment had been transformed into his living room. Two spacious bedrooms were created in one apartment, and a kitchen, dining area, and complete bathroom were created in the other. He was thrilled to be able to live somewhere with more space at last. A few empty cups of instant ramen were on a small table in front of her. As she glanced around the room, a large TV was mounted on the far wall, and a battered orange chair sat in the room's corner. Upon examining the other walls, she noticed that one featured a poster depicting the village, while the other contained multiple picture frames. She got up and walked to the wall to view the various photos after slipping her arms into Naruto's jacket sleeves. When she first saw it, Naruto was standing with Sakura and Sasuke, with Kakashi standing behind them. The first and only team photo taken by Team 7. She couldn't help but wonder if the photo hurt him every time he looked at it, even though it was clearly important to him. Was it a reminder of the promise that he was unable to fulfill? Before he left to go training, the next photo was of the Konoha 11 while she stood to the side with her team, watching him with a slight flush and putting her fingers together. She had a slight smile on her face as she looked at him standing in the center of the group, grinning broadly and punching the air. Another post-war picture of the group with Sai was below that one. This time, she stood next to Naruto, who had his arms slung across her shoulders. In the middle, she let out a little chuckle when she realized that, aside from the fact that they were standing together, they were both behaving exactly like in the earlier photo. She was still quiet and anxious, and he was still boisterous and happy. Looking at all the other photos of him with many of his friends, she walked along the wall. She recognized some individuals, such as the Kazekage and his siblings, but not others. She paused to examine another picture. Naruto was bandaged and sleeping in a bed this time. However, the girl leaning over his bed and kissing him on the cheek was what attracted her attention and made her feel a little envious. The girl looked familiar, but she wasn't entirely sure who she was because she couldn't see her face clearly. At some point, she would have to remember to ask Naruto about it. She continued examining the photos on the wall until she reached the last two. The first showed her dining at the Ichiraku ramen bar with Naruto. They had only enough food for one serving because it was right before closing, but they had gone there for something to eat. They shared the one bowl rather than attempting to find another place to eat at this late hour. By the end of the evening, they had begun feeding one another. After joking and laughing when she remembered that Ayame had taken the photo while Naruto was feeding her, her face flushed the same as it did in the picture. However, she was taken aback when she saw the last image. The man in it was nearly identical to Naruto, with the exception that he wore a white jacket, had longer hair, and lacked the whisker-like markings on his cheeks. A young woman wearing a lighter red battle kimono with a black obi stood next to him. She had long, flowing red hair and bright blue eyes. She let out a gasp and covered her mouth as she took a closer look. She had her eyes on a photo of his parents. She was aware of his parents' identities, but she was unaware of how much he resembled them. His eyes were his father's, but his appearance was his. "It's one of only 2 pictures I have of them." She quickly turned to face Naruto. She had not heard him return inside. "You have her eyes, confused?" he asked her. "I what?" Pointing to the picture, she said, Your Okawa-san, why you have your Okawa-san's eyes? He looked closely at the picture and said, I never noticed, everyone just says that I look like my father. She reached out to carefully trace around one of his eyes before retracting her hand, embarrassed by her actions. They're the same color as your Atua San. But their shape is J just like hers. Startled by her behavior, he found it difficult to speak before offering her a fresh change of clothes and a towel. He pointed her in the right direction and stammered, sorry I took so long, you can get changed in the bathroom over there. He gave her the clothes and watched her go into the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. Before heading to the kitchen to brew some hot tea, he heard her open the door once more as he was finishing up the drinks, and he turned to face her while holding a steaming cup of tea. He stared at her standing in the doorway, almost dropping the drinks in the process. Her feminine features were not concealed by the big, baggy orange t-shirt he had given her, and although it nearly concealed the shorts she was wearing, he could still see her slender, athletic legs. As he handed her a cup and watched her tiny bare feet walk to his couch, he suddenly became fascinated by the floor and hurried to sit on the table in front of her. In an attempt to overcome her embarrassment at her attire, she held the drink in both hands to warm them before turning to face Naruto and realizing that he had also changed. His shorts were a drab orange, and his black shirt was adorned with a plain white spiral. She thought he had never looked more dapper. Even though his blonde hair was still damp and stuck to the sides of his face, she realized she hadn't heard a word he had said when she noticed his lips moving. Sorry Naruto-kun, what did you say again? I said, are you okay? Why did you run? His inquiry reminded her of everything she had been able to put her pain aside when she had walked into his apartment and seen his pictures of his friends and family. Family, the source of all her suffering once more, but this time it was their loss. She looked away from him and said softly, I was scared. He then muttered a curse as he formed a single cage bunchen that fled out the front door and into the shadowy village. But why? You knew I was just outside the room if you needed me for anything. I mean, I thought you'd been kidnapped. Hinata gave him a puzzled look for a moment before responding. I need to let Ba-chan know I found you and you're safe. The room fell silent as she considered responding to him, and she nodded. He had gone out to bring her back to the village in a single day, stood next to her as she faced her father, and vowed to protect her and her sister after he had died. He had also looked for her again in the pouring rain. Concerned that she might have been in danger, she felt that he should know why she ran after everything he had done today. She took a mouthful of her tea and Naruto nodded in agreement. Ootou-san wanted to talk to me about the future when you left us. He told me things like clan secrets and how he wanted me to maintain our traditions. She spoke quickly to hide her mistake, hoping he wouldn't realize she was referring to him. He also asked me what I wanted for the future. When I told him, he asked me why I hadn't done anything about it. I told him I wasn't ready yet, that I'm too weak for why to do so. He jumped up from the table and said, You're not weak, Hinata. You've done so much to prove that whatever it was you two were talking about, I'm sure you'll do it whenever you're ready. That what he said? He said if it's what I really wanted, that I would do it whenever I'm ready. He smiled as he sat down again, this time next to her on the couch, and said, See, he was a smart man. If you like, you can tell me what it is you told him and I'll do whatever I can to help you get it. They exchanged glances for a moment before Hinata turned away, her face flushed. She slowly turned back to face him and said, Thank you and Naruto-kun, but no, maybe in the future I'll tell you what it is. I hope I will, anyway. She halted as her breathing became labored, saying, Then he asked me to too. He asked you what? He turned off the alarm to his heart monitor, then asked me to. To what? Despite his best efforts to maintain composure, he couldn't help but sound curious. Kill him? As Naruto struggled to recover from the shock of her words, the room fell silent. Had she been asked to kill Hiashi? Did she run for this reason? Had she murdered her own dad? Her stutter came back full force as she told him what had happened, tears streaming down her cheeks. He didn't want to carry on knowing that there was nothing else that people could do to help him. He was in so much pain and he didn't want to live like that, knowing that it would only get worse. He asked me to strike him with a juken to the heart. He said it was the final wish of a dying man. Uncertain of whether he wanted to know the answer, he stumbled to ask, Did you do it? She tried wiping the tears from her eyes on her shirt, but it didn't stop them from falling. No, I told him I couldn't do it. I said I loved him too much to do so. Uncertain of what to do, Naruto asked, What did he say? The thing that Hiashi had asked her to do still troubled him. I thought he had fallen asleep, but then I noticed that he wasn't moving and that there was no heartbeat. When I looked at the heart monitor, he just lay in his bed and didn't react when I spoke to him or shook him. That's when I realized. She started crying again and more quickly, saying, I got scared so I ran. Naruto quickly drew nearer to her and put his arms around her, keeping her close. I was afraid, So I ran. She buried her face in his chest as though to conceal herself from the outside world. And her voice was a muffled whisper. I lost my family and I was disappointed in myself. Disappointed? Confused? The blonde asked. I let him down. I couldn't bring myself to do the one last thing my Otou-san asked me to do for him. He had earlier expressed his pride in me. But I know he was disappointed that I was unable to fulfill his request. His last thoughts of me must have been about how much of a failure I am. She uttered as her feelings began to overwhelm her and she began to gasp for air. In an attempt to catch her breath, she felt Naruto release his hold on her and push her away, fearing that he no longer wanted anything to do with her. She clung to him more tightly, unsure of whether she would have the strength to live if she lost him too eventually. However, Naruto managed to release his hold on her and push her back, keeping her at arm's length from him as she bowed her head in defeat. Look at me. Her hair was covering her face as she slowly raised her head, and Naruto carefully reached out and brushed a few stray strands away from her face until her bangs once again framed her face. Her pale lilac eyes were scrunched shut, preventing her from seeing the expression of disappointment and rage that would undoubtedly be on his face before he told her that he would never want to see her again. Hinata, please look at me. At the command of his voice, her eyes opened slowly, then closed again. As soon as he reached for her, she opened her eyes to see her friend staring back at her after feeling a pair of hands gently hold her face. As he wiped away her tears with his thumbs, he said, I know you feel like you let your father down, and I understand that. You always want to help others, so I know you wanted to do whatever he asked, and that's why you believe you failed, don't you? Unable to find the right words, she nodded and leaned into his touch. Your father expressed his happiness at getting to know you better, but most of all, I'm sure he knew just how much you loved him, just like he loved you. He released her face and placed his hands on her shoulders, maintaining eye contact the entire time. He knew you were strong and you would do anything you could to help others. She threw herself at him, clutching him tightly, and he had to brace himself as she began to cry again, silently crying into his chest. Overcome by the emotion brought on by the reminder of her father's love, he wrapped his arms around her and she relaxed into his embrace as he went on talking. You loved him so much, it must have hurt you so much when he asked. I should have complied with his request. I could see how hurt he was. I should have been able to do it because I loved him so much and didn't want to watch him suffer, but because I'm so weak, I couldn't, she said softly in between sobs. Occasionally we don't want to let someone go because we care about them so much. As she considered what he had said, she froze in his arms, wondering if it was that easy, if she simply didn't want to lose him. Even if that's the case, I'm a shinobi who has been taught to set aside my feelings in order to kill. Why couldn't I repeat what I've already done? She waited for a response while glancing into Naruto's eyes before whispering, or am I just that weak? So you're weak because, despite his request, you were unable to kill your Otou-san? Hinata nodded back into his chest in response to Naruto's question. Well, I guess I'm weak too. What? She drew away from the blonde in disbelief and yelled, how can you be weak, Naruto-kun? You're so strong that you can accomplish anything. I really don't think I could have done it if it had been Ba-chan, Iruka-sensei, or even you, he said, shaking his head. His face then became solemn. Even if Jiraiya had survived his fight with pain and he asked me to, I wouldn't want to lose any of you because you're all like family to me. I doubt I could pull it off. He closed his eyes and a tear began to fall down his cheek as he thought about his old sensei, the crazy, sake drinking, purse stealing, hairy old pervert, and he couldn't believe how much he missed him despite all the injuries he had and the pain he must have been in. He opened his eyes to see Hinata staring back at him after a tiny, delicate hand reached for his face and wiped away the tears. Naruto-kun, I sincerely apologize. She knew he had been close to Jiraiya because he had never spoken to her about the pain his loss had caused him, and he had always spoken to her about their activities together. With a smile, her voice faltered as she spoke those few words. She cared about other people's feelings despite her own troubles. Thanks, the Jinchuriki smiled back at her and couldn't control the laugh that came out of his mouth. I remember you once saying you wanted to try and be more like me. Therefore, I wouldn't be upset with you if I couldn't accomplish it. As the raindrops outside danced against the windows, she couldn't help but put her arms around him again, resting her head on his shoulder and crying uncontrollably. Naruto followed suit, putting his arms around her and holding her close. Hinata watched Naruto return to the kitchen and bring back 2 cups of instant ramen, setting one on the table for her before he sat down next to her and began eating his own. Here you go, Naruto said, setting a fresh cup of tea on the table, which Hinata picked up and took a mouthful of. He slurped his noodles as though he were breathing them in rather than eating them, and he said, you know I'm here if you need any help. She put down her tea and took a small bite of her ramen, saying, Hi, arigato Naruto-kun. He apologized for only having instant ramen, but she didn't mind because she saw it as just another way he showed her that he cared, and eating ramen with her crush meant much more to her than any of the large, elaborate banquets she had attended with her clan. Before the grief of their loss could consume her once more, Naruto's voice pulled her from her thoughts of her clan and said, "And it's not just because of the promise I made, after all, you're my friend, so I'd do anything to help you." Naruto turned away from her, and she followed his gaze until it fell on the wall with the pictures she had been examining earlier. "I know there's only you, Neji and Hanabi left from the clan, but remember you're part of my family too. I mean, I always considered my friends to be my family because I never had a biological family." He struggled to figure out what the pale-eyed girl meant to him, so he decided to fill his mouth with more ramen and try to answer that question later. "Soccer is like my Oni-san, Ba-chan's like my, well Ba-chan and you're like my," he said, his voice trailing off as he thought about the girl. In the meantime, Hinata's mind attempted to complete his sentence by asking how he perceived Harayuro. Did he consider her a sister, a cousin, or perhaps something more? "Will you be alright?" When her crush looked back at her with his stunning blue eyes and noodles hanging off his chin, a tiny smile finally appeared on her face, which was red with embarrassment from nodding off while contemplating the various possibilities. She looked at the boy sitting next to her. "No, Naruto-kun, not yet. However, I will be." Hinata's pale skin was bathed in the warmth of the early morning sun as it shone through the window. The events and emotions of the day before had finally caught up with her, and she had finally fallen asleep. She tried to get more sleep by closing her eyes tighter as the sun shone brighter through the windows, but soon realized it wasn't working, so she turned her face into the pillow and pulled the blanket over her head in a last-ditch effort to block out the sun's glare. The effect was instantaneous. As the sun's glare disappeared satisfied, she settled back into her pillow and smelled the strange smell of sweat and dirt instead of the fresh lining she was used to, but instead of repulsing her, it made her relax more and lulling her to sleep. Or she would have if someone hadn't chosen to start knocking on the door, which began softly at first but grew louder and more difficult with every second that went by. She drew the blanket back down and opened her mouth to speak, growling in frustration. "Get out, I'm asleep." She awoke in disbelief as someone else spoke her thoughts before she could question it, though. She heard a moan from the couch she had been sleeping on, and she was astounded by what she saw. She was sitting on Naruto's lap while he lay on the couch with his head resting on its arm, and she was trying to figure out how they had ended up in this position, with a dark flush covering her cheeks as the door banged on, but her ears were deaf to the sound as she thought back to the previous night. After Naruto had helped her feel better about her father, the two had stayed up talking, and it had been a strange role reversal, with her doing most of the talking while Naruto listened quietly as she told him various stories and memories of her family, and when she got emotional, he simply wrapped her in his arms and held her close, reassuring her that there would always be someone to support her. The rest of the night was a blur, and she didn't remember anything until she woke up. She assumed that they had both fallen asleep in each other's arms from exhaustion, but whatever the case, she quickly pulled the covers off and looked at herself, breathing a sigh of relief that she was still wearing the clothes he had given her for the night, and that nothing inappropriate had happened at Euro. Not that she expected him to take advantage of her anyway, Euro, because he cared too much about other people's feelings to try something like that. Thinking about the blonde, she looked down at his sleeping face and was amazed at how peaceful he appeared to be. She chose to ignore the knock on the door and lay back down on top of him, his chest looking like the most comfortable place she had ever laid her head. But before she could do so, the visitor outside the apartment began to bang on the door even more forcefully in an effort to get their attention. The wooden door creaked each time it was hit, as if pleading for the assault to end, but the visitor persisted in trying to get their attention until he finally banged on the door so forcefully that he put his fist through it, finally waking Naruto from his sleep. He was so taken aback that he did the only thing he could think of. His eyes flew open as he reached under one of the cushions to grab a kunai to defend himself. He tried to sit up but was unable to do so, and when he looked down to see why he couldn't move properly, he was shocked to see Hinata lying on top of him, her eyes wide open and her face flushed, just inches from his own. He let out a scream. He looked down at Hinata, who was sprawled out on the floor trying to untangle herself, about to ask her what was going on when his front door flew across the living room before crashing into the kitchen units. The two teenagers looked towards the doorway to find an Anbu with a tiger mask standing there. Reaching over his shoulder, clutching his sword ready to strike, Naruto was caught off guard by Naruto screaming in her face, so she tried to get up and put some distance between them, but fell to the ground with her legs tangled in the blanket. He entered the room slowly, looking for any threats, before he looked at the two people lying on the floor. "What's causing the distress?" he inquired. The pattern on the blanket that was wrapped around her immediately caught Hinata's attention. She decided that the reason she was upset was that Naruto had caught her lying on top of him, and she didn't want to express it. Naruto, on the other hand, had never had any trouble voicing his opinions, and that wasn't going to change anytime soon. What's causing the distress? What's causing the distress? I'm in distress because you're coming in here and smashing my door, he repeated, his voice growing louder with each word. Do you not know what knocking is? Before he could finish his tirade, Hinata quietly interrupted, he did, Naruto-kun. You did? Wait, did you hear him? He asked, turning to face the Anbu before turning back to Hinata. How come you didn't wake me up? Well, the last thing she wanted to do was tell him that she had ignored their visitor in favor of spending more time curled up on the sofa with him. Fortunately, the Anbu spoke before she had to embarrass herself. She said, struggling to think of something to say and silently cursing the blanket wrapped around her legs, wishing she could pull it over her head to hide the blush on her face. Lady Hokage requests the presence of the both of you immediately. What does Ba-chan desire? Given the urgency of the request, Naruto asked in a worried tone. She wishes to discuss the future of the Hyuga clan. The mention of the Hyuga clan made them both pale. Hinata fought back the tears that threatened to fall at the reminder, while Naruto had forgotten all about them because of his abrupt awakening and invasion of his home. As he leapt to his feet and extended a hand to help Hinata up, Naruto said, "Thanks for the message." She looked at his hand and swiftly grasped it, pulling herself up until she was standing face to face with her crush. She said softly, "Arigato, Naruto-kun." She gazed at his face, lost in his eyes, then slowly lowered her gaze until she was looking at his mouth. It's okay, Hinata-chan," he said tremblingly, taken aback by the way she was looking at him. He had seen her gaze a few times before but didn't know what it meant, but he did know that he was beginning to enjoy it. The way she chewed on her lower lip, the tenderness and care in her eyes. The Anbu at the door cleared his throat, waking them from their reverie before he could consider anything else he liked about the look she was giving him. As he began to leave the apartment, Naruto pulled Hinata with him and said to the masked ninja, "Right, best get going." He was trying to stop his heart from racing. "Anyo, Naruto-kun, perhaps we ought to dress more appropriately." He froze in place, already outside the doorway, and glanced down at himself in his pajamas before turning to face Hinata, who was still wearing the shorts and t-shirt he had given her the night before. "Yay, that'd be a good idea." He laughed and went back inside, still dragging a crimson-faced Hinata behind him so they could get dressed, while grinning sheepishly at her and scratching the back of his head in embarrassment. Before nodding his head and vanishing in a cloud of smoke, the Anbu simply cocked his head to the side and silently laughed at the antics of the Hyuga heiress and the Jinchuriku. He had been expecting a meeting between the three of them in her office, discussing what was going to happen, when he was informed that Tsunade wanted to see them, but instead they found themselves standing next to the Hokage at the head of the large table in the council chamber, with multiple pairs of eyes observing them. As soon as they had walked into the room, all conversation had stopped, and they appeared to be waiting for something to happen based on the way they were being observed. With a voice that reverberated throughout the room, Tsunade yelled, "Okay, let's get this over with. I had wanted to speak to people privately first before informing you of the current situation," she said. But because of circumstances, she looked to her left, where Homura and Kaharu were seated, and said, "It was decided that you should all be informed now." She had wanted to discuss what had happened the previous evening with Hinata and Naruto first, but the elders, who had just returned from a diplomatic trip to the capital of the Land of Fire, had barged into her office and demanded to know why the village was on high alert after being informed. They demanded that the entire council attend her meeting with Hinata, despite her objections, as more and more people gathered in her office to find out what was going on. "As you are aware, the Hyuga clan was attacked 2 days ago by an unknown force, thanks to the efforts of the Hyuga, Anbu and other ninja present." She looked at the blonde sitting next to her. The attack was stopped and all known enemies were either captured or killed. A few of the civilian council members cheered when they learned that the village had defeated the attackers, but they soon stopped when the Hokage glared at them and told them that they were missing something crucial. However, the attack has destroyed the majority of the Hyuga clan. Cries of surprise and indignation erupted throughout the room. The village had not lost so much outside of war since the Uchiha Massacre. An elderly civilian raised his arm in the air to draw attention to himself and asked, "How could this have happened? A whole clan, gone?" Before being cut off by more cries of indignation, Tsunade explained, "They attacked using poisoned weapons and were able to activate the Hyuga's curse seal. Only the main branch members of the Hyuga clan were aware of the seal, which was a highly guarded secret that they would not readily divulge." Shikaku Nara whispered to his former teammates sitting next to him during all the yelling that he always believed the curse seal would be the catalyst for the Hyuga's demise. As Shuza pushed his bag of chips aside, the hunger he had previously experienced giving way to a sense of hopelessness, Inochi nodded his head in agreement. The room gradually began to quiet down, and everyone's gazes eventually shifted to Hinata. A minority of the civilians regarded her with suspicion and fear, while the majority did so with concern since Hinata was in front of them instead of her father. They assumed she was involved in the attack, even though they all knew that only a member of the main family could activate the seal. Naruto began to growl in rage when he noticed how they were focusing on the girl next to him. He recalled how people used to stare at him like that when he was younger, and they thought he was to blame for the suffering brought on by the Kyuubi no Kitsune's attack. He was determined to make sure they knew that, like Hinata, he had no control over it. Tsunade glanced at her fellow blonde. Sensing something was amiss, he was about to say something to stop everyone from staring at Hinata suspiciously, but she quickly interrupted him because she knew the look in his eyes. She was aware that he would defend Hinata. She genuinely admired his ability to protect his precious people and his good intentions, but his mouth always led to more trouble, and reprimanding the council would only make her headache worse. She explained, abruptly cutting off a council member who was about to speak, probably to imply that Dachi had also been taken prisoner. During the attack, Hyuga Dachi was captured while trying to lead two of the attackers out of the village. He also had an unconscious Hyuga Hanabi with him who we believe they were trying to kidnap. She could tell by the looks on some of the faces in the room that they didn't trust her. Why would he have assisted in the attack? Well, she thought to herself, what she was going to tell them next would silence any doubters. She grabbed a folder from the table in front of her and held it up for everyone to see, saying, Dachi has since been interrogated by Morino Ibiki and I have his report right here. Hyuga Dachi confessed to planning the attack along with two other clan elders. Both were found dead at the Hyuga compound. We've yet to perform an autopsy to confirm their cause of death and whether they were killed before or during the attack. We'll get those answers in due time. Dachi has also admitted to setting up the kidnapping of Hanabi with the intentions of claiming he'd rescued her. Apparently he intended to cast a genjutsu on her so that when she became the head of what was left of the clan he would be able to control her from behind the scenes. He also said he'd intended to kidnap Hinata as well. Tsunade paused, uncertain of how to proceed. This was one of the things she had hoped to discuss in private with the girl first. Everyone in the room, including Hinata, who had grasped Naruto's hand, had their eyes fixed on her, waiting for her to finish speaking. Her nails dug into Dachi's flesh as she tightened her hold on his hand with every accusation he made. Instead of grumbling, Naruto simply stood there and accepted the pain in silence. Understanding that it was insignificant in comparison to the internal suffering she was experiencing, he then simply squeezed her hand back to let her know he was still there for her. She persisted, knowing that he was on her side. She turned to Naruto and said, and use her for his own personal needs before selling her on. Many, including the experienced shinobi in the room, found it difficult to breathe due to the sudden surge of chakra he was releasing, which caused the temperature in the room to drop. He began to growl, softly at first, but louder and louder until everyone in the room could hear him. He used his free hand to grasp the desk in front of him, the wood straining under his fingers. That someone would want to use any of his valuable friends in this way and then simply sell them off as though they were property infuriated him. His eyes gradually turned red as his rage grew, and eventually a woman fainted, unable to bear the murderous intent he was projecting. Tsunade yelled, Naruto! And his head snapped toward her. More people would start fainting if she didn't stop him right away. She made a mental note to never let him near Dachi because she was certain that he would make sure that, if he was lucky, he would be living his entire life drinking his food through a straw. Control yourself or leave the room. You're no good to anyone like this. He inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly, but he was unable to regain his composure. He simply wanted to find out where the man was being held and rip him to pieces. After hearing what Dachi had wanted to do, when he felt a tiny, gentle hand gently rest on his face, he decided to follow the Hokage's advice and leave the room. To do just that, he turned to see Hinata's milky lilac eyes staring back into his crimson red ones, but he stopped. All she said in her typically quiet voice was, "Please, Naruto-kun." The effect was almost immediate, as all of the tension left his body and the desire to kill vanished. He gave himself a mental slap. He had completely forgotten that he was there for Hinata because he had been so consumed with his rage with Dachi. He closed his red eyes and opened them again, staring at Hinata with blue ones, thinking that by being by her side instead of pursuing the traitor, he could do more to help her. As Naruto relaxed, Tsunade exhaled in relief since she had to resist the urge to visit Dachi in his cell and beat him to the ground herself. After reading Ibiki's report, she couldn't really blame him. She wasn't sure if she could have stopped him, though, and she was certain that the damage would have been much worse if Naruto had gotten his hands on him. But when it came to him, Hinata was a natural. Every time his emotions overcame him, she seemed to soothe him with a few kind words or a tender glance. When interacting with him, she would need to keep the girl nearby. She would certainly be helpful in soothing him following one of his usual outbursts when he was informed that the wife of the fire dynamo had asked him to locate her missing cat. Once more she acknowledged that it was a waste of his skills, but who was she to complain when she was prepared to pay for an A-rank mission? That cat didn't like him at all, and she thought it was hilarious every time he returned with his face all scratched up. While Shizune looked for some smelling salts to wake the councilwoman, she suppressed a laugh at the idea and carried on with the meeting. He admits to hiring the men who helped him with the attack from a mercenary, and we're currently trying to find out the person's identity. Dachi will be kept imprisoned until we've extracted all the information we can from him. His fate after that will be decided then. While many of the room's occupants were nodding their heads in agreement, she noticed that some of them were wearing worried expressions. Some of these were brought on by the mercenary's name. He had offered assistance in attacking the village and was therefore concerned that he might try again, perhaps attacking the entire village the next time. Others were worried about Dachi's future. The Hokage would punish him for his traitorous actions, but since he had targeted the Hyuga in particular, the clan head would typically decide his fate. One of the younger councilmen, growing suspicious of Hyuga Hiashi's absence, said, "If I may ask Lady Tsunade, where is Hyuga Hiashi?" Others in the room gazed at the vacant seat that was customarily occupied by the clan head and nodded in agreement. Tsunade inhaled deeply as she was about to inform everyone of Hiashi's fate, but Hinata spoke first. She struggled to speak, but she managed to say, quietly, "Miyaoto-sanpi passed away last night." Although she was aware that Tsunade would have told them, she felt obligated to tell them herself because she was his daughter. A tiny smile appeared on the Sanin's lips. Most people may not have understood the courage it must have taken for the typically quiet and reserved girl to inform everyone about her father's death, but she did. Her respect for the girl only increased when she realized that a few years ago, if she had been forced to do the same thing, she was certain the girl would have fled the room. But as soon as the Hyuga heiress had finished speaking, a chorus of voices broke out, some demanding further explanation and others expressing their disbelief in the situation, drowning out her thoughts about the girl. She signaled for silence by raising one hand in the air while using the other to massage her temple. Many of the clan heads nodded in agreement, saying, "As you were informed, Hyuga Hiashi was injured during the attack. While his injuries were not severe, he had been poisoned. I removed the poison from his system, but it had already caused extensive damage to his internal organs which couldn't repair. He passed away last night after spending his final hours with his daughters." Tsunade's attention was drawn to an elderly counselor near the back of the room who raised his hand in the air. She signaled to him that it was okay to talk by nodding her head in his direction. "May I ask what the current status is of the Hyuga?" He inquired. The question sparked interest from many of the other smaller clan heads in attendance. A power vacuum had been created back when the Uchiha Massacre had taken place. In an attempt to distinguish themselves from the others and unseat the Uchiha as one of the village's major clans, many of the clans, particularly the smaller ones, attempted to capitalize on their demise. The Hyuga ultimately benefited the most, even though many of the clans gained prominence, more power, more money, and more respect. However, now that they had experienced a similar fate, there was a genuine chance for one of the other clans to improve their reputation in the village. Tsunade felt her blood boil when she realized the question's hidden meaning. How could some of the individuals in the room care only about strengthening their own clans at the expense of others? She decided that the village's safety and security were far more important than worrying about the possible power struggle that was emerging, and that it could wait until a later meeting. As it stands, Hyuga's Hinata, Hanabi are the last surviving members of the main branch. While Hyuga Neji is currently deployed on a mission outside the village, Anbu are still searching the village and compound for anyone that may have escaped the attack and gone into hiding. Through these searches we've been able to find a small group of children that managed to get away there in good health, and we're hoping we'll find more people," she stated as the room erupted in happiness. Hinata embraced Naruto in relief. Tears streaming down her cheeks, she was somewhat relieved that some children had survived in spite of everything that had happened to the clan. She had been having a hard time the night before with the thought of so many members of her family being killed, particularly the kids she knew couldn't protect themselves even with their training. However, he felt somewhat relieved to know that there had been survivors besides her sister. Tsunade couldn't help but smile as she looked around the room, especially when she noticed Hinata's happiness. Before murmuring to herself that he might end up in the seventh circle of hell, she reminded the room, "There is also Dachi, of course." The elders sitting next to her immediately stood up as soon as she said, "Hinata, as heir, will be assuming control of the clan." Kaharu got up from her seat and told the Hokage, "Hyuga Hinata is not of age to be a clan head. Therefore a regent will be required to represent the clan until she is of age." As he pushed his glasses up his nose, Homura went on, "I nominate Kaharu and myself to shoulder this responsibility. We have both previously managed the assets of the Uchiha clan for when their heir was ready to assume control, and we both also have plenty of knowledge and experience which can be passed on to the heiress to prepare her for new responsibilities." Tsunade stifled a chuckle. Although her advisors would act in the village's best interests, their tactics were occasionally dubious, and she was confident that they would somehow take advantage of the circumstance well. Those plans needed to be halted. The elder's shocked expressions only made her smile wider. That will not be necessary. A guardian for the Hyuga sisters and advisor for their clan's affairs has already been appointed. As she took a sip of her drink, Kaharu remarked, with respect Tsunade, this is not the kind of decision that should be made lightly. She was obviously unimpressed that a decision had been made without first consulting Homura and herself. And if you have chosen someone, should you have not informed us first before commencing the meeting? With a smug expression on her forehead that betrayed her frustration, she answered, between barging into my office and then calling this meeting yourselves, when was I given the opportunity to do so? Her tone cautioned the two to be careful with their next words. Homura asked the next obvious question after the elders exchanged silent glances and acknowledged that they hadn't given her a chance to explain the whole situation in this instance. Who has been chosen as their guardian then? Before Hyuga Hiashi passed away, he requested that Uzumaki Naruto become their guardian, and he accepted. Upon hearing Naruto's name, an elderly council member jumped up and gestured toward the blonde. He yelled across the room, no. You can't let that demon rule the Hyuga. He'll exploit his power. The Sannin screamed back at the man, his name is Naruto. As she slammed her fist down on the table in front of her, breaking it open, I strongly advise that you remember that. The man cowered beneath the table, and Naruto just looked at him pityingly. Some people were unable to see past the demon that was sealed inside of him, despite everything he had accomplished for the village and the ninja community at large. Meanwhile, Shizune exhaled a sigh of relief. The amount of work she would have had to do if Tsunade had struck the counselor instead was far greater than the paperwork she would have needed to finish in order to get a new desk. Another man, apprehensive of what the strong cage might do, raised his hand to speak slowly, almost reluctantly. After she gave him a nod, he started talking slowly and deliberately. Excuse me Hokage-sama, but I thought that in situations like this only the village elders, council members and clan heads could assume guardianship over a clan? Tsunade remarked, feeling more at ease. You are correct Tetsu-san. However, 2 weeks ago at the last clan meeting I petitioned for the Uzumaki to be recognized as an official clan of Konoha, along with all rights and responsibilities that come with it. While Naruto is the only known survivor of both the Uzumaki and Namikaze, he may in the future want to start a family. And I think giving him clan status is the least we could do after everything he's done, as well as for what the village has done to him in the past. The proposal was voted unanimously in favor of, with only Homura and Kaharu unable to cast their votes due to being out of the village. The elders gazed at Tsunade, irritated that they had been left out of such a significant decision and certain that the vote's timing while they were away from the village was not coincidental. If they had been present and had had enough time, they might have convinced enough clans to reconsider or at the very least deny him a council seat in order to facilitate a meeting between the Land of Fire and the Land of Spring. Tsunade had sent them both to the Fire Capital, stating that she needed senior representatives. As the elders raged, a second voice called out across the room, will Uzumaki-san be using the Clan Restoration Act? The what? Asked Naruto, seeking an explanation from the Hokage. Tsunade was never a fan of the act. It made sense when the village was first established because of the frequent wars, but in times of peace it was just a way for perverts to get what they wanted with women. He won't be expected to use the act, however, she said, looking at the young man she considered family, unhappy with what she was about to say. If he wishes to use it he may. Hinata began to worry as Naruto kept looking around the council chamber in bewilderment. She knew that the act's goal was to rapidly expand the clan's size and that there would be people waiting for her to begin repopulating the clan. But she was more worried about Naruto and all the possible wives he might have. Although she wanted to be with him, she wasn't sure she could or wanted to share him in that way. Once everyone had had a chance to process what they had been told, Tsunade spoke again, saying, right, that's all the information I have to give to you all at the moment. Now if you don't mind I have matters to attend to with Naruto and Hinata. She then looked across the room at Homura and Kaharu, who were getting up from their seats and walking towards her, probably to join in on their conversation, because they had already made things more difficult by scheduling this meeting before she had had a chance to explain the developments to Hinata, so she was determined to give the girls some privacy. Homura and Kaharu finally gave in. They had already made the Hokage give information to the council before she was ready to do so, and if they pushed any further, she would probably start smashing more furniture. She growled, stopping them in their tracks, and the three of them looked at each other with hardened eyes, searching for a weakness in the other. If they wanted more information, they would have to be more discreet. When more information becomes available, I'll get in touch with everyone. With a wave of her hand, Tsunade dismissed the council, saying, meeting adjourned. She was relieved that the elders were not resisting her order and promised to deal with them later. The council stood up and bowed to their leader before heading out, with a few members pausing to offer Hinata their condolences and congratulate Naruto on his new position after everyone had left the room. Shizune locked the doors and went back to stand by her master's side, who had reseated the two teenagers. "I'm sorry, Hinata," the Hokage replied as he looked at the child. "I'd intended to tell you everything before informing the council, but as you saw, some people just weren't willing to wait." After accepting the apology with a simple nod, Hinata turned to face the boy next to her and asked, "Why didn't you tell me they'd let you establish your own clan?" With a hint of irritation in her voice, she asked him, why hadn't he told her about his clan? We'd shared so much since the end of the war, and while she was initially very happy for him, she was now beginning to feel a little upset about the fact that he hadn't told her. He scratched the back of his head and smiled sheepishly, saying, "Well, actually I wanted to tell you about it, but you were about to go on your mission, so I was going to tell you when you got back. Do you recall? When you returned, I said, I had something to tell you." As she remembered the conversation, her little anger was swiftly replaced by embarrassment. He had mentioned that he had wanted to tell her something, which was why she wanted to return quickly from her mission. As she gave it more thought, she began to feel bad because she was certain he had been dying to tell her last night but had chosen to comfort her instead. "But then I forgot because of," Naruto said, his expression growing more sorrowful. "I wanted to tell you first so nobody else knows. That's why the council was surprised, I guess, since I asked Ba-chan to keep it quiet." He was unable to discuss what had transpired, but everyone understood what he meant when he said, "Well, you know. We need to talk about what will happen with you and Hanabi now that Naruto's status has been resolved," Tsunade said, feeling the need to put some order into the conversation and address more pressing issues. "I don't know what you want to do in the long run, but for the time being the two of you need somewhere to stay. What is the compound's problem? Are they unable to remain there?" Tsunade shook her head in response to Naruto's question. "No, Gaki," she pulled her fist back, preparing to beat the blonde for asking such a dumb question, and said, "If they want to stay there in the future, that's fine, but for at least a few weeks they'll need to stay somewhere else until the place has been secured and cleaned up." Hinata cringed as Naruto flew across the room and into the far wall with a thump thanks to Tsunade, and she said softly, "We can just stay in a hotel until things are settled down. I'll arrange that for you if that's what you want, and the council will naturally pay for it," the Hokage yelled. "Shizune!" She stopped her assistant, who was headed to check on the blonde who was stuck in the wall, and instructed her to get the necessary paperwork instead. The sooner she finished that bothersome task, the better. "She can stay with me if she likes." Everyone was taken aback by the abrupt statement, and they all turned to face the voice's origin across the room. Naruto, as he pulled himself from the wall and shook his head, shaking debris free, he reiterated, "She can stay at mine. I mean, I'm sure she'd feel more comfortable staying at someone's home rather than some random hotel." He said additionally, "It will be simpler for us to complete all of the clan-related tasks I am supposed to assist her with if she stays with me, and if anyone tries again, they will feel safer with me." The three women exchanged glances. Shizune was amazed that he had thought of a seemingly well-considered idea, while Hinata's face began to flush as ideas flew through her mind. She was thankful that he was offering them his house, but she couldn't help but think of all the other possible outcomes of the two living together. "So, what will we do with Hanabi and the other Hyuga members while you're keeping an eye on Hinata at your apartment?" she inquired, considering that while he was happy to take Hinata in, it appeared that he had completely forgotten about the little sister and the rest of the family that needed a home as much as he denied it. He could be just as big a pervert as Jiraiya, and she didn't want to risk him doing anything inappropriate. Tsunade asked, rethinking her decision to pull her earlier punch and considering sending him through the wall the next time. However, Naruto simply returned her smile and said, "Of course, Hanabi is welcome to stay with me as well. If I only took care of one of them, I wouldn't be much of a guardian, would I? They'll want to stick together, won't they? Where do they intend to rest?" Knowing why her master was interrogating him, Shizune joined in, asking, "You only have 2 bedrooms, you plan on sharing your room with one of them?" With a broad smile, she said, glancing at Hinata, who appeared to be about to pass out as the suggestion caused all of her blood to flow directly to her face. "Obviously not, they can have the beds, I'll sleep on the couch. It's not like I'm a pervert," he yelled back, offended by the charge. As everyone considered what had been said, the room grew eerily silent until Hinata finally spoke. "I've made up my mind." She looked at the 3 people in the room and then at the lone blonde's feet, unable to look him in the eye because her nerves were starting to get the better of her. "I would like to accept Naruto-kun's offer for me and Hanabi to stay with him if he truly is willing to accept us," she said, her voice growing quieter as she spoke, and she started pressing her fingers together without realizing it because she was starting to worry that he might change his mind. Naruto, however, simply smiled. "Mind? Of course I don't mind," he said, laughing. which seemed to give her the courage to raise her head and give him another look. If I wasn't Will, wouldn't I have offered, would I? He went on, approaching her and giving her a hug, which she promptly returned. Until then, the two simply stood there holding hands. The Hokage's voice made them both jump in surprise and move several feet apart, embarrassed that they had been caught in such a situation together. If you two are finished, I think it's time we went to see Hanabi and tell her what's been decided. With her face as red as a beetroot, the heiress stammered, why yes I really need to go see Hanabi, and see how she is. With a trembling laugh, Naruto walked over to the chamber doors, unlocked them, and held them open as everyone left the room. Yes of course, he said, running his fingers through his hair. As she let the others out first, Tsunade asked, by the way, Gaki, do you intend to have the rest of the Hyuga stay with you? Hinata and he both looked as though they had forgotten about them, so she laughed and said, don't worry. We'll work something out for them. Let's go see Hanabi for now. With a nod of agreement, Hinata left the room and headed for the hospital where her younger sister was sleeping. Naruto trailed behind her, stumbling into a quick step next to her without realizing the door he had been holding swing close and striking Tsunade in the face or Shizune, ensuring her master didn't hospitalize him. A week had passed since the Hyuga had been attacked. Plans were promptly started after the council meeting, and the following day, a funeral for the deceased was assisted. During the service, the entire village Ayuro, both shinobi and civilians Ayuro, had assembled in front of the Hokage's tower. Tsunade stood in front of them, attempting to reassure them and remind them of the Hyuga clan's significant contribution to the village's growth and development, but everyone fell silent. Many of the children in the front row of mourners began to cry. The children and the 5 adults who had sheltered them during the attack were the only members of the Hyuga left. Aside from Hinata, Hanabi, and Neji, they had survived the attack because they had been too young to have had the curse seal placed on them. Tsunade eventually concluded her remarks and moved away from the podium, allowing Hinata to take her place alongside her sister. Looking out over the sea of people who had come to pay their respects, Hinata said, it's hard to find the words to explain how we're feeling. But my sister and I are very grateful for the support that everyone has shown us in our family. To lose a family member is always tough, and to suffer a loss on a scale such as this is even more so, but we will be strong, we will heal, we won't let what has happened to us control our future. She turned to Hanabi next to her, who gave slight approval nod. The sisters had decided that Hinata would speak for them prior to the ceremony. Even though Hanabi had always been the more self-assured of the two when it came to public speaking, she was at a loss for words in that circumstance. Then Hanabi reached into her pocket and took out a scroll, which she gave to her sister. We shall carry on, for the good of the village, and the good of ourselves. We will learn from the mistakes of the past so that a tragedy like this will never happen again. We will never forget what has happened here, and we'll never forget those that we've lost. She started reading what was written on it while holding it in front of her. Katsuma, Hitomi, Ryu, Kenta, Senshi. The names of her departed relatives. She called out each name on the lengthy list so that everyone could hear and remember it as she moved slowly through it. As the names of their family members were called out, the children in the crowd started crying because they realized they would never see them again, and instead of reprimanding them for acting in a way that was typically deemed unsuitable for Hyuga, the adults joined them, sobbing with grief and giving them a tight hug while assuring them that their loss would not be in vain. Motoko, Katsuhiko, Takeshi, she continued, and as she said each name, a picture of the individual appeared in front of her. To improve relations between the main and branch houses, Hinata had made it a point to spend time with everyone in her family. Even though she could never really get to know them all, the two houses had gradually begun to unite after her and Neji's altercation during the Chunin exams, and as she and her cousin grew more formidable as ninjas, so did the ties that bound them together. One of her greatest accomplishments was helping to reunite her family. Hanabi raised her hand to her face as her sister spoke, wiping away the tears that were beginning to fall. She was determined to maintain the strong, stony fa section 8 her father had instilled in her from an early age. Despite the fact that her emotions were tearing her from the inside out, it seemed to be the only thing she could do to honor her family at the moment. Hinata, meanwhile, decided to shed her tears. Every name on the list served as a reminder of a person she would never again see. As Hinata struggled to read the last name, she eventually reached the end of the list with tears in her eyes and her voice hoarse. But as if refusing to accept the loss, her voice failed her each time she opened her mouth to speak. She felt her confidence finally leave her as the entire village stared at her, waiting for her to say something more. Her body began to tremble and her breathing became more labored as she searched for something to say. The crowd's silence became unbearable to her, so she wiped her face on her sleeve to wipe away the tears, only to have more come. Abruptly, she let go of the scroll, causing it to drop to the floor and begin rolling in the direction of the building's edge. She fell to her knees, panicking even more, and scurried to find it before it was gone. Before the scroll could fall, a hand swiftly reached out from behind her and took hold of it. She turned to thank her, expecting it to be Hanabi, but instead she saw Naruto. In contrast to his usual orange attire, he was wearing his black mourning garments, and his once bright smile had turned into a worried expression as he took her hand, helped her stand again, and then held the scroll out to her. As she accepted the scroll from him, a brief smile appeared on her lips as she was reminded that the blonde had always been there to support her. She turned to face the villagers who had been waiting for her and said the last name on the list, muttering a quiet thank you that was only for his ears. Hiashi. After saying her father's name, she turned to Naruto and embraced him as her emotions overcame her. He stood there, holding her to his chest, reassuring her that she wasn't alone, and then he led her away from the podium, where Tsunade resumed her speech. Kaharu and Homura exchanged approving looks with each other as Tsunade described how the village would move on from the tragedy, not impressed that the heiress could not keep her cool. Hinata, however, was oblivious to all of this as she kept hugging Naruto, pausing only to draw Hanabi closer. With her sister holding her, she also finally broke down in tears, letting go of all the feelings she had been suppressing during the service due to her Hyuga pride. Startled by the newcomer, Naruto decided it would be best to just keep doing what he was doing and put his arms around both of his sisters, embracing them. Her first reaction, when Naruto's arms suddenly appeared around her waist, was to strike him for taking liberties. As her teachers had taught her to do, however, she chose to draw him and her older sister closer, finding solace in their company. Following the completion of the village's respects, the ceremony was moved to the Hyuga compound, where the deceased were buried in a private service one by one. The bodies of the dead were lowered into the ground there under the supervision of the village council and the remaining Hyuga. The group began to disintegrate as the last graves were filled in after being reminded of how valuable they could be. Tsunade went back to her office to continue managing the village while the council members headed home to spend time with their families after saying goodbye to their family. The children were emotionally spent and the Hyuga returned to their temporary residence, leaving only Hanabi, Hinata, and Naruto. The three of them moved through the gravesite in silence until the girls eventually located the one they were searching for. The grave of their father. Naruto stood farther back to give the girls some privacy while the girls, who were lying to rest next to their mother, stood in front of them and spoke to them in a quiet voice. Hanabi expressed regret that it was taking place in these circumstances and expressed regret for not seeing her mother sooner. She expressed her regret to her father for not being able to do more the night of the attack and her resolve to strengthen herself in order to prevent another attack of that nature in the meantime. Hinata pledged to fulfill her father's wishes to tell Naruto about her feelings and to do everything in her power to make them proud while also aiding the clan's healing and strengthening as a family. The girls each placed a single flower on the graves and bid farewell, vowing to return soon before joining Naruto and heading back to the village, prepared to try and move on, as the skies eventually grew darker and began to rain. As they dropped the boxes they had been carrying around on the floor in the foyer, a group of Naruto clones yelled, "That's the last one, boss." The original shouted from the opposite side of the houses, "That's great. You guys can go now." As soon as he was done, the clones disappeared in a cloud of smoke, and Hinata and Hanabi entered the room with boxes in tow. Hanabi complained as she dropped her box on the floor, causing the kunai and shuriken it contained to rattle from the impact. "Why do we have to carry all this stuff? He could easily make enough bunchins to do it all himself." As her sister placed her box on top of the ones the clones had left and began to look around the house, Hinata reprimanded her, saying, "He's letting us stay in his home. Hanabi, you shouldn't expect him to do everything for us." She had assumed that the three of them would share his tiny apartment when Naruto had offered to let them stay with him, but Naruto had other plans. The council had recommended that he invest in a new, larger house because of his new clan status in the village. Tsunade reassured him, however, and explained that there was a small compound that had once belonged to his parents, tucked away towards the back of the village. The property needed renovations after years of neglect, but he could use it whenever he pleased. Since learning about it, he had been spending every day there with a horde of bunchins repairing everything from the floors and roofs to the perimeter fences. He didn't like the idea of staying in such a large place alone, so his original plan was to simply renovate the place and let Tsunade use it for important guests who were staying in the village while he stayed in his apartment. However, he realized that his tiny apartment would be too small for the three of them to share for very long now that the Hyuga sisters were staying with him. Naruto went to their new house to complete the repairs while another group of bunchin went to get his belongings and another group went with the girls to get theirs. As she sat down on a box and joked at the dozens more that were scattered across the floor, Hanabi grumbled, "Well, he could have given us more help to carry all this." Naruto emerged from one of the bedrooms, descended the stairs to join the girls, and opened the box she had been carrying. Well, to be fair, you only carried one box in the end. As he looked at the contents, he laughed and said, "And it's the box I said you could have left. This place has plenty of weapons." She gave me a cheeky smile in return, saying, "Well, now we have more." The girls were startled when a new voice called out, "Yo Naruto, where'd you go?" They turned to face Kiba, who was leaning against the banister at the top of the stairs. However, Naruto saw his teammate and her sister before he could respond. As he leapt over the banister and landed in front of the girls, nearly hitting one of the numerous boxes on the floor, he exclaimed, "Oh, hey Hinata, how you doing?" Hanabi gave him a stern look as she answered, "I'm fine Kiba, thank you for asking." "Was it really necessary for you to jump down the stairs?" He laughed and flashed his fangs in a broad smile. "'Cause not, it's just a lot more fun that way." Hanabi wasn't amused, but Naruto laughed with him and Hinata hid a little giggle behind her hand. She reprimanded him, saying, "You should be more respectful when you're in someone else's home." Kiba turned to face Naruto and said, "Right, the furniture's all just about set up." He totally ignored what the young Hyuga had said, which only made her angrier. "I'm gonna have to go now. I've got to be ready for my guard shift soon and I need to get a Kumaru from my sis first." Hinata asked, her voice tinged with concern, "Is a Kumaru alright?" He only ever left a Kumaru with his sister when he was experiencing a problem. He put her mind at ease as he began to make his way through the maze of boxes and out the front door by explaining, "Nah, he's fine, he just picked up some fleas from that last escort mission we did and nothing we seem to do will get rid of them, so Hana's having a crack at them with some new stuff she's got." As he waved goodbye to his friend, Naruto said, "Okay, thanks for the help. Kiba, remember to let the guys know if you see them before me." Then he had an idea and hurried to the doorway to call out to him, "And don't you dare bring a Kumaru with you if he's still got fleas, or you'll be the one getting a flea bath." As she picked up a box and began to ascend the stairs, Hinata watched Naruto return to her and asked, "What did you mean when you said tell everyone?" He smiled as he piled two boxes on top of one another and hurried to follow her, saying, "Well, since the three of us have moved into a new home, I thought I'd be cool if we had a party, you know, kind of like a housewarming." Entering her bedroom, Hinata placed the box on the bed, ready to be unpacked, and said, "Anyo, I don't know if that's a good idea, we've not had a chance to settle in yet." Before her voice grew more solemn, Hanabi inserted her head through the door and begged, "Aw, come on sis, it'll be fun." As she recollected her birthday, she remarked, "It can't be worse than the last time." She took a few small items out of her box and set them on her nightstand, saying, "I know that I just don't know if it's really appropriate to have one so soon." Simply put, celebrating so soon after their family's death didn't seem appropriate. Hinata turned to face Naruto and Hanabi as they pleaded, "Please." However, she was unprepared for what she saw. Both of them were staring at her like a puppy. Normally, she would have a hard time saying no to Naruto and her sister, but when they both had their wide eyes and pouting lips on her, she realized she could only say one thing. "Okay then." Hinata shielded her ears from the loud noise that Naruto and Hanabi were making as they joyfully danced around the room to celebrate their victory. When the two finally began to relax, she asked, "So when was you thinking of having the party?" Which gave her time to reflect. "Well, I was thinking tomorrow night." Hinata shook her head and remarked, "But we haven't got the house ready yet. With all the boxes strewn all over the house, we can't have a party." He made a small group of bunchins and smiled, saying, "Well, we better hurry up and do something about that then, shouldn't we?" He told them to move the boxes at the bottom of the stairs into the right rooms and unpack them, and they swiftly vanished with Hanabi, leaving him and Hinata alone. "You finish that box and I'll unpack this one for you," he said, diving right into one of the boxes he had brought up in an attempt to finish the unpacking as soon as possible. "Where do you want?" He was going to inquire as to where she wanted the contents placed, but he was taken aback by what was on top, so he reluctantly reached inside and took it. What Naruto was that? There were a few things she wasn't comfortable with the man she loved seeing just yet, like the letters she'd written for him while he was training with Jiraiya that talked about how she felt but never had the courage to send, and the photo of her dressed up as a baby Anba by her mother when she was a baby. I asked as she turned to face him, but she instantly froze when she saw what he was holding. However, he was holding a thong in his hands, so it was neither of these. The girls had laughed and looked at her knowingly, and she had admitted to herself that she wasn't opposed to the idea in the future, but now that she was staring at the flimsy garment so intently, she wished she could hide under a rock far, far away. Ino had given it to him as a gift after a day of shopping with the girls, saying she was sure that a special someone would enjoy it eventually. She gave in to the pressure from the girls, who took pleasure in discussing her new relationship with Naruto, and she reluctantly accepted the gift, even though she tried to argue that they simply had a closer friendship now than before and he wouldn't be seeing her in her underwear. In the meantime, Naruto was shocked by what he was holding. He had seen his fair share of women's underwear while traveling with Jiraiya, and the elderly Toad Sage seemed to enjoy taking the underwear from the women he had slept with, leaving it at the bottom of his bed for him to find when he woke up. When he insisted on knowing why he kept doing it, Jiraiya would simply ask him if he was gay and then laugh at his overreaction. What shocked him more than the fact that Hinata, who appeared so innocent and sweet, would wear something so skimpy and sexy. The picture of her wearing it quickly came to mind as a tiny trickle of blood began to run from his nose. As the girl stood there like a statue, trying to come to terms with her boy she liked seeing her underwear, he hurriedly wiped away the blood, threw the underwear back in the box it came from, and hurriedly left the room with a muttered apology for thinking of Hinata in such a lewd way. After seeing Hinata's underwear, Naruto locked himself in his bedroom, hoping that doing so would help him get rid of the perverted images that kept coming to mind. However, it wasn't easy, so he set himself to work, unpacking the various items he'd boxed away to move, making his bed, and putting his clothes away, even if he only threw them in the back of the wardrobe. But after he was done, he realized that the pervert inside of him would not let go of the thought of Hinata in a thong, so he tried meditation sitting quietly on his bed. He tried to clear his mind, just like the old Toad Sage Fukasaku had taught him back on Mount Myoboku. However, he gave up after 30 minutes. The only thing he had managed to do was make his ass go numb. In desperation, he finally began pounding his head against the wall in the hopes that it would have some effect. However, it only caused Hinata, whose room was on the opposite side of the wall, to knock to check on him. He smiled and told her that he was fine despite the bright red mark that had appeared on his forehead, adding that he had been hammering in some nails to hang some pictures encouraged by his growling stomach. He then suggested that they go get ramen for dinner. The journey had been rather quiet as the three of them made their way to Ichiraku Ramen as Naruto and Hinata struggled to look at each other while Hanabi would just look back and forth between the two, trying to work out why the two were acting so weird with each other. The silence was eventually broken as they stepped under the flap of the ramen bar to find it packed with people busily eating their food while laughing and talking with their friends. Struggling to find somewhere to sit, Hanabi was about to suggest that they maybe try to get something to eat somewhere else when they heard a voice call out to them. Searching through the throng of people, Naruto found Ayame waving them over at the counter, where she quickly made room for them there to sit. It was at this point, when they were asked what they were having, that Naruto found out that the young Hyuga besides him had never actually tried ramen before. Scandalized by the idea of living with someone who had never even tried what he considered the greatest food in the world, he'd quickly order one of everything on the menu for her to try. As Ayame started preparing the food, Hanabi tried explaining to him that she only had a small appetite and that there was no way she could possibly eat so much food all to herself. The blonde just smiled back at her though and told her to eat what she wanted and that he'd handle the rest. So it came as a huge surprise to her that after trying a few different bowls before settling on a recipe she liked, that Naruto quickly started making his way through the food that remained. Hinata just sat there laughing at the astonished look on her sister's face while she ate her own bowl of ramen. She wasn't sure what had surprised Hanabi more, the fact that he was making such a spectacle of himself as he ate, or the fact that he, after finishing everything off, he then ordered more. As the meal progressed and Ayame joined them to check on them, Naruto and Hinata were finally able to look at each other and talk to each other. The embarrassment of the earlier part of the day had faded away as they were able to find the humorous side of the situation, which made Naruto very happy, especially when Hinata told him that she understood it was an accident and that she didn't think he was a pervert. He was particularly relieved by the last part because he didn't want either of the girls to worry about him spying on them while they were staying with him. Naruto was a voice that made the blonde sit up in his bed. He searched the room for the source of the strange voice but couldn't find it, so he closed his eyes once more and tried to fall back asleep. Naruto. He opened his eyes, certain that this time he had heard his name. Determined to find the source of the voice, he rolled out of bed and walked out into the hallway, looking around him only to see the outline of the corridor doors illuminated by the moonlight shining through the windows. With no idea where the voice was coming from, he closed his eyes and waited for it to call out to him again. Naruto. His eyes swung open, and he hurried toward the sound until he stopped outside the door from which he heard the voice. Ayuro. Hinata's room. Upon realizing which room it was, he was going to knock to check on her when the voice called out for him once more, and this time he recognized it as Hinata's, so he hurried inside and shut the door behind him. "I've been waiting for you." Naruto woke up with a thump as he rolled out of bed and landed on his head. Sitting up on the floor, he rubbed the sore spot on his head as he tried to remember what he'd been dreaming about. He remembered a voice calling out to him, yet the more he tried to recall of the dream, the less he found himself remembering. Deciding it couldn't have been that interesting of a dream if he couldn't remember it, he looked at the clock to check what time it was. Seeing it was coming towards 10 o'clock, he pulled himself to his feet and threw his t-shirt off before grabbing the towel that was hanging at the end of his bed and make his way to the bathroom to take shower. Making his way down the hallway, he stopped outside Hinata's room. Looking at the closed door, he felt a moment of deja vu as he tried to hear if she was up. Not hearing any noise coming from the other side, he decided that she must still have been asleep, so he left her to catch up on her sleep since she hadn't seemed to be getting much of it since she'd gotten back to the village. As he arrived at the bathroom, he reached for the door, but it opened, revealing Hinata standing on the other side, clad only in a bath towel and surrounded by steam from the hot shower. Naruto simply stared at her, his jaw moving up and down as if he was trying to speak, but nothing came out. When he realized he was staring, he quickly spun on his heels and turned away from her, stammering, Sorry." Hinata stammered back, "It's okay." And Naruto. Although she was ashamed that Naruto had seen her so naked, she couldn't help but glance at his toned bare chest and, thanks to the tight boxers he was wearing, his backside when he turned around. Should have dressed more appropriately. I'm just used to having an ensuite bathroom." "Me too." Naruto wrapped the towel around his waist in an attempt to appear more modest, and he laughed nervously. "I'm so used to living alone I didn't think about running into you or Hanabi." Before hurriedly returning to her room, she said, "That's all right. I suppose it'll take us all some time to get used to living together." She then collapsed on her bed and attempted to stop her heart from racing. As the door closed, Naruto released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and thanked Kami for Hinata's kindness and understanding, as he wasn't sure what he'd done if she had assumed he was trying to take advantage of what had happened the day before with the thong. He turned back around and started to head for the bathroom when someone rushed past him, pushing him aside and slamming the door behind him. Realizing what had just transpired, he began pounding his fist against the door. "I arrived first," he shouted. After poking her head out the door to stick her tongue out at him, Hanabi laughed and said, "You snooze, you lose." She then shut the door and turned on the shower so she could wash herself. With a sigh of frustration, he descended the stairs, remembering what had happened to the front door the last time he hadn't answered straight away, and opened it to find 3 young genin waiting for him. "But it's my house," he yelled as he banged on the door again, only to hear her laughter over the sound of the running water. Eventually, he gave up, admitting defeat, and dragging his feet made his way back to his room to get dressed so as not to be caught by Hinata again, dressed in nothing but his underwear. "Naruto Uzumaki." "What?" inquired the young boy in the center of the group. "Yes, I see." As he tried to figure out what they wanted, her response sounded more like a question. The young girl in the group stepped forward and gave one of the boys a quick elbow to the ribs, saying, "See, I told you this was the place. Lady Hokage had sent us. She claims that she must see you, Hyuga's Hinata, and Hanabi right away." "Is that all?" the blonde asked, snatching up the towel that had been dangling around his waist. As the knot started to loosen, he had no intention of flashing the 3 children in front of him because it was already awful that Hinata had caught him in his boxes. The girl grinned broadly and said, "Yep," before turning to face her 2 teammates. "All right, mission accomplished. Let's go find Sensei," she said, putting on her heels and heading down the path. One of her teammates trailed behind, but the third remained. "Are you okay?" The boy hadn't moved or said anything since answering the door, so Naruto wondered why he was staring at him so much, fearing that something might be wrong with him. He was about to call out to the boys' team when he spoke. With a big silly smile on his face, he said, "You're so cool, can I get an ought?" He was about to say something, but the girl came marching back down the path, grabbed his shirt collar, and dragged him away while reprimanding him for being so uncool in front of the Leafs hero. "What was that?" As she approached him, fully clothed and stroking her hair with a towel, Hinata posed the question. As he considered how many of the younger ninja in the village looked up to him, he explained, "Ba-chan wants to see us and she sent my fan club to tell me." He then realized that his towel was finally going to fall from around his waist and quickly fled to his room before flashing Hinata once more. "Ba-chan, you can't be serious. Gaki, do I appear to be kidding?" Shizune shuffled through the paperwork that littered the desk, seemingly unconcerned by the warring blondes, while Hanabi watched in awe as Naruto and Tsunade yelled at each other, nose to nose. In the Hokage's office, Hinata stood next to her, debating whether or not it would be wise to leave the room to give the 2 some privacy. Tsunade reseated herself and chose to exercise restraint. "This is an important mission and you were requested for it personally, and it's a really important client. I'm not interested. You already gave me a mission to protect Hinata and Hanabi, and I can't do that whether I'm battling bandits, rescuing princesses, or chasing after a damn cat, so I'm not doing it," Naruto continued. Regardless of whether the client was his kami, he continued to look down at Tsunade while he crossed his arms in defiance. This prompted the cage to stand up and slam her fists onto the desk, sending Shizune scurrying for the scattered papers and scrolls as they hit the floor. "Don't give me that you aren't the Hokage yet." Naruto grinned at the veiled comment, but it vanished as she went on. "I am. Therefore, you will follow my instructions, and I affirm that you are doing so." As Naruto tried to calm down, Hinata spoke and said, "Excuse me, Hokage-sama, but if Naruto has to go on this mission, then what will happen with this?" Naruto opened his mouth to argue further, but was stopped by a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You have a choice," though Tsunade, sure that Naruto had let out his frustration about the mission, said, "You can either stay in the village and we assign you a new guardian until the Gaki returns, or we can just send the two of you along with him." She couldn't help but laugh as she saw the shocked expressions on Hanabi's and Naruto's faces. Neither had anticipated her suggesting such a thing. "Is that even feasible?" Hinata questioned. "Clan leaders don't usually go away on missions unless they're urgent." Her father had only gone on one mission unrelated to the clan in all the years she could recall, which was when he joined the front lines during the Fourth Shinobi War. "Wouldn't I have to stay to lead the clan?" "Normally, you would be right, but there are always exceptions. I'd be pleased to watch your family while you're away if you wish to go on the mission," Sunday clarified. "I know my place should be with my family, but I feel as though I'd be more useful helping Naruto." Hinata asked nervously. If you don't mind, she valued her family, but since the majority of them were still young, they needed someone who could care for and look after them rather than just lead them and strengthen their clan. Tsunade acknowledged her worries and said, "Course not." "Hey!" For the first time since entering the room, Hanabi yelled, "Do I have a voice in this?" "You do. Of course. I can't keep an eye on you both if Hinata's with me while you stay in the village now, can I?" Naruto said, laughing and patting her on the head before she dismissed him. "You get to choose what clothes you want to take with you." She snorted at him and then looked a little sheepish, saying, "That's not what I meant. I want to go, but I've never been on a mission outside the village before." Naruto questioned incredulously, "What, you call yourself a ninja but you've never been on a mission before?" She looked at her feet, embarrassed by her admission, and explained, "No, I was trained at home by my father rather than at the academy, so I've never actually graduated. The only time I've even been outside the village walls is when I'd accompany father to some of his meetings." Naruto tried to reassure her, saying, "Don't worry about it, me and Hinata have been on loads of missions, we'll take care of you." He then turned back to face Tsunade. "She is okay to come with us, isn't she?" asked the man. Searching through the stacks of scrolls and documents that covered her desk, she explained, "Normally I'd say no. However, a few weeks ago I'd received a request from your father about you officially joining the ranks of our ninja forces." Shizune joined the search after noticing that her master was having trouble finding the papers she was looking for. She soon located the stack of papers they were looking for and gave them to him. Tsunade accepted them with a nod of appreciation and went on as she dug through one of her drawers. Pushing aside the sake bottles, she proudly said, "This is all the information I have on your training, as well as a report from an academy instructor who's been observing you. With all this, I'm more than happy to say that you would have graduated the academy and would like to officially make you a genin." She then produced a leaf hide tie and gave it to the young Hyuga. With a start, Hanabi accepted the headband and said, "Thank you." Like her sister, she stood there and gazed at the polished metal spot on the black cloth before tying it around her neck as a choker. Hinata congratulated her sister and gave her a hug, threatening to cry with happiness at her accomplishment. "Well done. Father would have been proud of you." Naruto chuckled as he ruffled her hair once more, but she slapped his hand away and then attempted to straighten it up. "Well, look at you now, you're one of us." After observing her reaction, he mentally noted how much fun it would be to annoy her by simply playing with her hair. "Well, since we're all going, what's the mission, Ba-chan?" Tsunade took the mission scroll Shizune had given her and quickly read it again, explaining, "Your mission will be to protect the client. You're to escort her to the fire capital, provide security and protection while there, and when she's finished bring her back to the village. We're not expecting any problems, but because of who the client is, this will be an A-ranked mission." Hanabi turned pale as Naruto resisted the urge to cheer upon receiving a high-ranking mission, but he couldn't help but dance silly. After noticing her sister's anxious expression upon learning that the mission was high-ranked, Hinata questioned, "Are you sure just the three of us will be okay on the mission?" "I'm sure Hanabi will be fine, but she is inexperienced, and you did say that the client was important?" Recalling her first mission, she was afraid of making a mistake because all her team had to do was do some gardening for an elderly couple. However, that had only been a basic D-rank mission. This mission, particularly for a genin's first mission, could suddenly become very dangerous. Tsunade tried to reassure the sisters by saying, "Don't worry, I figured that you'd all take the mission, so I'm sending another squad along with you, that way Hanabi can still get some experience out in the field and the protection of the client won't be compromised." She turned to her first apprentice after realizing that her words had the necessary impact. "Shizune, please send in the rest of the team." Shizune hurried to the door, bowed her head, opened it, and gestured for someone to come in. Konohamaru. Naruto cheered with delight as he watched his young friend enter the room along with his teammates Udon and Moegi. "You're on this mission too? Your boss and I are on a mission, that's fantastic." He applauded as he hurried over to meet Naruto and slapped him in the fists as his teammates got to know the Hyuga sisters. After a few moments, Tsunade called out, "Right, that's enough of that. This is a high-profile escort mission. As I mentioned earlier, bring her to the capital, ensure her safety there, and then return her. Additionally, Naruto will be leading the squad because he was personally asked to do so," she said, extending the scroll to him. Really? He finally got to demonstrate his leadership abilities as he took in the scroll. The only missions he had ever been given responsibility for were those in which he was left alone to deal with small bandit camps or look for lost cats. He heard that, which disappointed him because he knew Kakashi would have been in charge if he had been available, but he was still excited about the opportunity. "Well, the rest of your team was requested, but I'm still waiting for Sakura to return to the village and I want to keep Kakashi around just in case anything happens." While Hinata was congratulating Naruto, Konohamaru approached the youngest person in the room and said, "Hi Hanabi." He waved weakly at her, noticing the Hite 8 around her neck. "Hey, have you received your degree?" However, Hanabi didn't seem impressed with him. Instead, she grunted and turned away from him, finding the old Hokage's photos on the wall to be quite intriguing. "Ah, hurry up, are you still not angry about what transpired?" He attempted to stand in front of her but she kept turning away, so he asked. When he persisted in invading her personal space, she angrily replied, "No." They were about to strike him when they heard a knock on the door. Azumo and Katetsu poked their heads through the door as Tsunade called for them to come in. "Excuse me, Hokage-sama, but your guest has arrived," Katetsu said, grinning broadly. She turned to the shinobi already assembled in her office and said, "Great, show her in. I'd like you all to meet our client for this mission," she said. At this point, a slim woman wearing a light purple kimono trimmed in red and gold entered the room. The girls watched in shock as Konohamaru and Udon's mouths fell open upon realizing who it was. Koyuki Kazuhana, movie star and daimyo of the Land of Snow. Moegi excitedly whispered to Udon, who was berating himself for not carrying a camera, "It's Princess Gale." Naruto began to approach her, but Hinata stopped him. "Hey Koyuki, how've you been?" he asked. Hinata stammered as she attempted to reprimand him, still struggling to accept the fact that they would be in charge of someone so significant and well-known. "Nah Naruto, you can't speak to a daimyo like that." Koyuki dismissed Hinata's worries and turned to face Naruto, saying, No, that's okay, I'm fine, thank you Naruto. You haven't changed, have you?" She hid a laugh behind her hand as he joked, "I got taller, does that count? This is going to be so cool working with you again. You asked for me because I was so awesome last time, didn't you?" Udon rubbed his nose and interrupted, saying, "Excuse me, may I ask what it is you'll be doing in the capital?" Everyone in the room turned to face the door when someone said, "She'll be promoting her new movie, of course." A man with short gray hair, dressed in blue body armor and black trousers, was standing there. "She'll be at the premiere. Meet her fans and relax and unwind." Tsunade said, "And you are?" as the man sat down beside Koyuki. "I am Kojima, head of Miss Kazuhana's personal security." Konohamaru questioned, "Why do you need us if you're part of her security?" Koyuki pushed a few stray hairs behind her ear and explained, "As Kojima said, I'm here to relax and I figured that they could do with a break too. So while I'm away in the capital, I'm leaving them behind here so they can have a vacation of their own." Kojima whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I still think it's foolish for us not to go with you." "Everything will be fine, you know. If I had to guess, I'd say you didn't want a holiday," she responded. Although she was grateful for everything Kojima and his men did, she had to question whether any of them had lives outside of defending her because they were so preoccupied with their work. After a brief pause during which it appeared that Kojima was prepared to explain why he opposed replacing his security team, Hinata inquired, "Will we be leaving straight away?" Koyuki ran her fingers through her dark hair and explained, "No, I want to see some of this village of yours first, so I'll spend the day here and then tomorrow we'll leave. That's when your mission will begin." Naruto joyfully pumped his fist in the air and said, "Yes, we can still have the party." He then turned back to Koyuki. He put his arm around Hinata and pointed to Hanabi, saying, "Hey, you want to come? We've just moved in together in a new place, so it's kind of a housewarming party." Koyuki looked at the two young adults standing together and said, "Oh, so the two of you are together? I bet you make a cute couple?" The suggestion made Hinata flush, and Naruto began to cough and choke. When he eventually caught his breath, he said, "No, no, we just live together." Why did he always feel ashamed when someone mentioned the two of them? "Oh," she said, "I'm sorry." She felt that her assumption was incorrect, "and I'd love to come to the party. I'll get someone to point me in the direction of your home later." She hadn't attended a party for one of her films or a national holiday in years. Koyuki gave him a stern look, indicating that she wasn't in the mood to listen to Kojima express his disapproval of the plan. "If there isn't anything else, we should get going, my lady. There is a lot to prepare for before you leave tomorrow, and you did say you wanted to see the village first," he said after a moment's reflection. Naruto questioned, "Just one thing? What time do you want to leave tomorrow?" Looking forward to the celebration, Koyuki responded, "I think it's best if we leave at about 10, that way we should have all recovered from the night before." "Okay." Naruto told his team, "All right, now, let's meet here at 9, make sure you're packed for a long trip." Then his face lit up with a big smile, "And don't forget the party starts at 8, I'll see you then." Koyuki and Kojima then departed the office to tour the village. They were soon followed by Moegi and Udon, who went home to prepare for the mission while chatting excitedly among themselves about the well-known client they would be defending. Konohamaru gave Hanabi a quick glance before following suit. Naruto turned to face the Hokage as everyone was leaving the room. "Is there anything else, Bakan?" She pointed to the scroll he was holding and said, "Just remember to read the mission scroll, and don't do anything stupid. Don't make me regret putting you in charge." Before leaving the office with the Hyuga sisters, he gave her a playful salute and said, "Will do." However, he halted when he heard Tsunade shout, "Naruto, this party of yours, will there be sake?" Naruto grinned broadly as he turned to face her. He laughed and left the room, leaving Shizune to deal with a Hokage that was now bouncing off the walls at the thought of being plastered. "It's a party, of course there will be." Kiba yelled, "Yo, Naruto, where's the booze?" as Naruto opened the front door to meet him. He stepped aside to let him into the house and said, "Shouldn't you say hello first?" Instead of waiting for a response, Kiba began to move past him with Akumaru at his side, but he was stopped when a hand grabbed him by the collar. Naruto questioned, gesturing to the big white dog, "Is he clean?" "Of course he is," Kiba said with a laugh as he managed to escape Naruto's hold and went inside to find alcohol, while Akumaru stayed behind to see if he could stay. After shaking his head in shock at Kiba's behavior, Naruto waved the dog away, indicating that he was welcome to stay. As Naruto went to shut the door, he let out a joyful howl and hurried off to find his master. However, a hand swiftly emerged before he could close it, preventing it from doing so. He opened the door again, wondering who it was, and saw Shino standing there. He pulled the door open again and held it open for him to enter, saying, "Oh hi Shino, you want to come in? You didn't notice me again." "Oh," groaned the blonde, "don't start that again." It wasn't his fault that the man tended to stand quietly in the background, but Shino seemed to harbor resentment toward him from the moment he returned from his training with Jiraiya, because it was the only time he hadn't recognized him. Upon noticing that Shino was holding a box wrapped in purple paper, he made the decision to simply leave the door open while he remained silent outside the house, confident that he would come inside after he had finished moping. "You got me a housewarming gift?" As Naruto attempted to grab the box, Shino stoically responded, "No, this is not for you. This is Hinata's. It was left with us when you picked her up from our last mission. This is the first opportunity I've had to return it to her." He pointed to the back of the house and said, somewhat disappointed that he wasn't receiving a gift, "Oh, well, Hinata's in the back." Shino gave him a brief nod and went inside to look for his teammate. There was a lot going on in the kitchen as Ino reprimanded him and told him to save some for the others. Choji stood at the buffet table sampling the various dishes that had been prepared. Hinata sat quietly at the side of the room, listening to the music, while Shikamaru rested on a counter and watched the clouds pass by through an open window while sipping his drink. As he finished a sandwich, Choji remarked with approval, "This is good food. I'm guessing you did the food, Hinata? If Naruto had done it, I'm sure he'd have just ordered ramen for everyone, right?" Hinata burst out laughing, "You're right. He was going to get Ichiraku's to cater the party. He was so disappointed when I stopped him, but he didn't mind as much when I said I'd do it." Ino laughed as she put her arm around the girl and drew her close before quickly taking a picture of the two of them. "That's my girl. You've got him under your thumb now, haven't you?" Not wanting her friends to think she would try to control Naruto now that they were living together, she attempted to explain, saying, "No, it's not like that. I just told him that ramen wasn't something you serve at a party and he was okay with that." But Ino simply laughed it off as Hinata's cheeks began to flush. She smiled broadly and said, "Don't worry, I was just kidding. we know you wouldn't do anything like that, especially with Naruto. However, Akamaru darted into the room and stopped at Hinata's feet before she could respond as the dog joyfully barked back at her. She asked, "Hello Akamaru, are you feeling better?" and scratched him behind the ear, grateful for the opportunity to change the topic. But before Kiba entered, Ino was going to bring up Naruto again because she wasn't going to let the conversation end. He glanced around the room and asked no one in particular, "Where's the booze?" Shikamaru said, closing his eyes in frustration, "Most people say hello first." He knew that the peaceful atmosphere he had been enjoying would soon be gone now that Kiba had arrived. Kiba scoffed back at him, then turned to Hinata and grinned ferociously, saying, "You sound just like Naruto when I got here. Hey Hinata, you okay?" After all, Kiba was just being himself, so Hinata just laughed to herself. She pointed to a table with bottles on it and said, "Hi Kiba, thanks, I'm fine, the drink is over there." When he appeared to skip gleefully to the table and pour himself a drink, Ino shook her head. She was starting to question whether he was an alcoholic based on his behavior. As Shino entered the room and saw Kiba down a drink before pouring himself another, he remarked, "It would appear that Kiba has finally found the alcohol." With a kind grin, Hinata said, "Hello Shino." She stood up from her chair to embrace him, and he did the same. After not being able to see her since her family's funeral, he said, "It is good to see you looking well. How have you been?" She was thankful for Naruto's assistance and said, "I'm fine. Thank you. It seems a little surreal with everything that's happened, but we're settling in well with Naruto. He's made us feel very welcomed." Shino held the box he had been carrying out in front of him so she could see it, and he said, "Yes, but he did seem disappointed that this was not a gift for him." "Is that? Yes, this is the item you bought while on our last mission together. You had left it behind when you were forced to leave." She took the box away from Shino and gave him another hug, saying, "Thank you Shino, I can't believe I'd forgotten all about it." It is understandable that you would have forgotten it, given the circumstances. She was thankful that she could still do something for her sister's birthday even though it was more than a week late, saying, "Well, it may be late, but at least now I can give Hanabi her birthday present." Shino gestured to their teammate, who by now was beginning to drink his second bottle of sake, and said, "Well, I'm glad I could be of help now. If you'll excuse me, I'll leave you to entertain your other guests while I stop Kiba from drinking all the alcohol." When Naruto opened the front door to let Konohamaru, Udon, and Moegi in, he exclaimed, "Hey guys, glad you could make it." As he led the group in, Konohamaru remarked, "Well, why wouldn't we boss? It's always cool to hang out with you. And we get to see your new place," Udon exclaimed, surveying the hallway in wonder at how much larger the new home was than the apartment where Naruto had previously lived. Moegi said, "We got you a gift." She took a bottle out of one of her pouches. The blonde took the bottle from her and glanced at it, saying, "Thanks." Curious about how they obtained the drink given that they were underage, he asked, "Sake? How'd you get this?" She smiled and said, "Transformation jutsu." The clerk never realized. "We thought I'd just die without anyone to water it while we're away on the mission, so we decided not to get you a plant." The blonde laughed as he threw the bottle to Udon and gestured toward the back of the house, saying, "It's good to see you guys are honing your skills. Would you mind putting this in the kitchen with the others?" "Sure thing boss," he said, adjusting his glasses, and continued walking into the house with Moegi at his side. Konohamaru, on the other hand, remained with Naruto. As he continued to survey the house, the young Sarutobi remarked, "This place looks so much better than your old place. The place is so big I bet you could get lost around here." "Yay. Earlier I got confused and went into Hinata's room by mistake." He scratched the back of his neck and laughed nervously, saying, "I'm glad she wasn't in there, though Hanabi did see me leaving the room. I'm not sure if she believed me when I said I wasn't peeking." "Don't worry boss, I'm sure she didn't think you were trying to peek at her panties or anything." The remark caused Naruto's face to flush, and his mind instantly returned to the previous day's events. Fortunately, a voice called out to them before Konohamaru could wonder why he had suddenly become red. "Why is he in this place?" The boys turned to see Hanabi standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the young Sarutobi with daggers. Konohamaru remarked, "Hey Hanabi, you look nice," referring to the light green dress she was wearing in the hopes that Hanabi would appreciate the praise. She made her way to the bottom of the stairs and stopped in front of him, snapping back at him, "Don't give me that." "What are you doing here?" she insisted. "Remember that I invited him?" As he watched the young girl continue to glare at the boy, wondering why she was acting so hostilely toward him, Naruto explained, "You were there." Hinata had told him stories about the young girl's temper, but this was the first time he had seen it. As Naruto supported him, Konohamaru smiled cheekily and said, "See, you should really let bygones be bygones." Is the kitchen where Hinata is? Hanabi asked Naruto, ignoring the boy who was speaking to her and turning her back on him, shocked by her demeanor. Naruto simply nodded his head, and Hanabi hurried off in the direction of the back of the house. Naruto turned to Konohamaru, who had been observing Hanabi depart, and said, "Okay, so what exactly happened to make her act like that towards you?" As soon as she shut the door between them. The boy hurried to leave after saying, "It's nothing, boss, don't worry about it." However, he was stopped abruptly when a foot stepped on his long scarf that had been dragging its way across the floor. As Konohamaru glanced back at Naruto, he said, "It can't be nothing if she's acting like this. And we've got that mission tomorrow, so we all need to work together, and I don't want to fail my first mission in charge just because the two of you can't get along." Naruto laughed. "All right, boss," Konohamaru sighed in defeat. The incident occurred a few months ago. Her father asked me to spar with her for a time, claimed that in order to see how she would perform, he wanted to match her up against a Hyuga who had a different style than the one she typically trained with. I agreed because I thought it would be enjoyable. I was so mistaken during our match. She was like a man possessed. She was always on top of me, and I was unable to retaliate when I made small openings. Why not? Did you find it enjoyable when a girl beat you up? As he imagined Hanabi attacking Konohamaru, Naruto chuckled. "No, it's not that," he said defensively, "it's just that I didn't want to hurt her. You were engaged in combat, it's expected of you to cause each other some slight pain." "Yes, but I didn't want to cause her too much pain in case I upset my father." "Come on, boss, a Euro. That man was really frightening." Naruto agreed, nodding his head even though he had only met Hiashi in the hospital before he died. The front he had put on when he saw the man in the village shouted, "Anger me and you will pay." The story Hinata had told him about her father when he was upset only served to reinforce that belief for a moment. He wondered if Hanabi's own temper came from him. "Okay, so you went easy on her, that's why she hates you?" he inquired. "No, she hates me because I used the sexy jutsu on her." The blonde, certain that he had misheard, asked incredulously, "You what?" As he watched Naruto cover his mouth in a weak attempt to contain his laughter, Konohamaru explained, "I panicked. Okay, I couldn't hit her with a fire jutsu or a Rasengan, could I? So when I saw an opening I transformed. She was so surprised I was able to tackle her down and restrain her long enough for her father to end the match and call me the winner." As he struggled and let his laughter spill into the hallway, Naruto asked, "So that's it then? She hates you because you beat her with the sexy jutsu?" Konohamaru covered his face as he recalled the unpleasant incident. "Yay. She complained saying I'd cheated, but Hiashi said I'd won within the rules, so she kicked me in the and she hasn't spoken to me since." Naruto patted the boy on the back, who was now very thankful that it had only been a kick, and said, "Well, I guess it could have been worse. She could have jukened you there. We'll simply need to figure out how to get back in touch with you, won't we?" Konohamaru gave a nod of approval as Hanabi stomped into the kitchen and approached her sister, who was speaking to Ino. She grumbled, "I can't believe he showed up." "Who?" As she sipped her drink, Ino posed the question. She took a drink of her own and gulped it down, huffing, "Konohamaru. What is wrong with Konohamaru, and why? Did he not receive an invitation?" the blonde inquired, taken aback by the young girl's behavior. When Hinata realized her sister would not tell her, she explained, "She's mad at him for using the sexy jutsu on her." Although Hinata loved her sister, even she had grown tired of hearing her complain about being cheated on. "Really?" With an eyebrow raised, Ino asked, "Did you like what you saw?" Her cheeks flushed with shame at the suggestion, and she spat her drink out of her mouth in shock. "What? No, that kind of thing doesn't appeal to me." Hinata recalled the young boy's days-long visit to the Hyuga compound after the spar's attempted apology, during which her sister locked herself in her room in defiance. He's tried to apologize a few times, but she keeps refusing to accept it. Ino laughed as she drew the girl near to her to tease her, saying, "Well, maybe she's just using it as an excuse because she really likes him. Does someone have a crush on Lil Kono?" As she freed herself from Ino's hold, Hanabi said defensively, "No, why would I like a boy like him? He's gross and annoying, and he wears that stupid scarf of his all year round." As Ino turned to face the older Hyuga, who blushed at the mere mention of the man in orange, she said slyly, "Well, you wouldn't be the first Hyuga to like someone who wears something different." She attempted to justify her selection of Naruto by saying, "I don't like him just because of his clothes. His bright clothes might be loud like him, but there's more to him than that." After hearing her sister defend the blonde on multiple occasions when the clan elders made derogatory remarks about him, Hanabi muttered, Yay, we know he's strong, caring, and always willing to help others. We've heard it all before, sis. You sound like a broken record when it comes to Naruto." The young girl gave Ino a glare when she said, Now, she's just being protective of her man. You do the same with Konohamaru too. I bet, if you weren't so stubborn to see that you like him. Hanabi was about to tell Ino that she didn't like the boy when Hinata abruptly pulled out a wrapped box, catching her attention. I don't like. Hey, what's that? She said. She was happy to divert her sister's attention from her argument with Ino about boys, a topic the Yamanaka were very passionate about, and said, "It's your birthday present. I know it's late, but I didn't forget." Hanabi's eyes glowed with excitement as she snatched the object from her sister and began tearing the paper off, asking, "This is so cool, what is it?" She opened the lid and set the box on top of a unit after tearing off the paper when she saw the contents. A big smile spread across her face. A karaoke machine. Hinata laughed as her sister jumped at her, nearly knocking her to the ground as she gave her a hug. "Yes, now you can sing at home instead of us having to go out all the time. If you want, maybe we could set it up later." Hanabi nodded rapidly. "So what's it like then?" Naruto responded. "What's what like?" Unable to comprehend the question. Shikamaru poured 2 drinks and then handed one to Naruto, asking, "What's it like living with the girls?" "Oh, that it's okay, I guess." "It's okay, you guess?" Kiba asked, leaning on the blonde for support as the effects of the alcohol he had been consuming finally began to take hold. "Well, we've only been lived together for a day." "Yay, but you and Hinata were alone together in your old place for like a week and now there's Hanabi." Unaware of what Kiba was attempting to say, Naruto simply stared at him in confusion. "So what's your point?" "Well, everyone's talking about how the great hero of the leaf and eligible bachelor Uzumaki Naruto is now living with the beautiful and single Hyuga sisters. Rumor around the village is you're starting your very own harem," Kiba clarified, suggesting with his eyebrows. Naruto exclaimed, "What? No," in shock at the thought. Shikamaru simply shook his head, shocked by Kiba's remark. "That's your teammate and her sister you're talking about." On the defensive, Kiba retorted, "Like I said, it's just a rumor. The girls think it's all a part of the Clan Restoration Act. Since your new status was made public, I bet they'll be knocking down your door soon enough, asking if they can join." As he recalled his discussion with Tsunade regarding the nature of the act, he blurted out, "The Clan Resto, no I'm not." Jiraiya would have done anything to be in this situation, surrounded by women, had been his initial thought. However, the thought of them wanting even more of him scared him a little after he was chased around the village by all the fangirls he had acquired through all his adventures. Can't a guy just live with 2 girls? Kiba gave a headshake. "Of course not, you can't tell me that nothing's happened since you've moved in together." Naruto's face flushed rapidly as his thoughts instantly remembered the moment he had seen Hinata emerge from the restroom wearing only her panties. Kiba was quick to notice, a savage smile spreading across his face despite his drunkenness. "You dog, something has happened, come on, what was it?" Naruto immediately became defensive. "No, nothing happened, why would you say that?" After taking a long sip of his sake, Shikamaru remarked, mildly amused at Naruto's embarrassment, "Because you've gone all red." While trying to find a way out of the conversation, Naruto covered his burning cheeks and said, "It's nothing, I'm just getting used to living with other people. I've always lived by myself, never having to share, so it's something new." Shikamaru asked, "What about the time you spent traveling with Jiraiya?" Normally, he wouldn't have cared, but how could he not be accustomed to sharing after spending more than 2 years traveling with the renowned Sannin? That was different due to the constant traveling. We would frequently camp out, and when we did stay in a hotel, I would typically have the place to myself because Pervy Sage would frequently visit the bars and hot springs to conduct research. Kiba grinned broadly and said, "That's it, you were conducting your own research, weren't you?" Everyone knew that research was a code word for spying on women in Jiraiya. When he realized what he had said, he stopped talking and his face lost its color. "No, it was an accident. I didn't mean to peep on Hinata, and she was dressed in her towel, so he hadn't intended to share the incident with them." "What?" exclaimed Kiba, spit out his drink and sprayed Shikamaru. "When?" In an attempt to convince them that he wasn't a pervert, he explained, "I was going for a shower and I bumped into her as she was coming out. It was an accident." As if in agreement with him, Akamaru barked along as Kiba laughed, "I bet it was." Raising his voice in anger that his friend didn't believe him, Naruto retorted, "It was. I'd never do something like that to Hinata." Unfazed by the blonde's abrupt outburst, Kiba questioned, "And why's that?" He opened his mouth to say, but stopped when he couldn't think of anything to say. When he was younger, he had made numerous attempts to peek on the women in the hot springs, and he would have jumped at the chance to see Sakura wrapped in nothing but a towel. At that time it was different with Hinata, though, and he simply couldn't figure out why. After failing to come up with a better response, he finally said, "I wouldn't do that to her." He knew it sounded cliché. To get the dog Nin to back down, Shikamaru said, Leave him alone, Kiba, you know what he's like when it comes to Hinata. The blonde questioned, what's that supposed to mean? In the hopes that Naruto would stop questioning him, Shikamaru replied, nothing, but Kiba filled him in without any trouble. He waved his arms wildly and said, it's the way you act around her. She's more than just one of the guys, isn't she? But before he could say another word, Choji, who had been listening in on the conversation, swiftly approached from behind and covered his mouth with his hand. As he battled Kiba, who was fighting to break free, Choji swiftly clarified, he just means that the two of you have become closer friends. Fortunately, the doorbell rang. So Naruto excused himself and went to answer it. Team Asuma members turned to Kiba as soon as he left the room. The Nara was unimpressed that Kiba had nearly told him that everyone knew he liked Hinata, even if he wasn't aware of it himself. I thought we'd been over this, we weren't going to say anything to him, we'd agreed to let him work it out for himself. As he freed himself from Chogi, Kiba let out a dog-like whine, I know, but he's so dense it's going to take him forever to figure it out. Naruto closed the door behind him as he left the kitchen, his friend's words still echoing in his head. Was he truly different in Hinata's presence? But before he could give it any more thought, he discovered a girl with blue hair in the hallway. Hey Hinata, what are you doing out here? The sound of his voice made Hinata jump, and she turned to look at him, feeling ashamed that he had taken her by surprise. She explained, I heard the doorbell, and you were talking, so I thought I'd answer the door. Oh well, you can go back to the girls if you want and I'll get it. When the bell rang again, she tried to persuade him to return to the party, saying, No, I'll get it. It looked like you were talking about something important. After a brief exchange of glances, the two began to laugh when they realized how ridiculous it was for them to be arguing over who answered the door. Before Hinata could respond, Naruto put his arm around her waist and escorted her to the door. How about we both go then? He asked. Even though the contact was only between friends, she always enjoyed it and was certain that she would never grow accustomed to it. But the intimacy of the way he held her close to him caused her cheeks to flush. However, it came to an abrupt end when he took his arm away from her to open the door. Fortunately, when she saw who was on the other side of the door, her disappointment vanished right away. When the door opened, a little girl yelled, Auntie Hinata, and hurried inside, hopping between Naruto's legs before jumping into Hinata's arms. Holding the little girl to her chest, Hinata laughed and said, Hello Naoko, how have you been? Have you been good for your mommy? With her large red eyes brimming with excitement, she described the day's events as Hinata put her back down. Yay, we went to the park and we saw the pretty butterflies, then I had a big ice cream. The young girl turned to Naruto after she was done. Who are you, mister? Kurenai entered the house, picked up her daughter, and placed her on her hip. That's Naruto. He lives here with Hinata, I told you, remember? She said. I hope you don't mind me bring Naoko. I couldn't find a babysitter. Naruto, who hadn't seen the girl since she was a baby in her mother's arms, said, No, it's okay, you're both welcome. As her child began to bounce around, attempting to persuade her mother to put her back down so she could explore the spacious house, she explained, Thank you. We won't be staying too long, I just wanted to make sure the three of you were settling in all right. Naoko put herself back down, struggling to hold on to her daughter Kurenai, but as soon as her feet hit the floor, she hurried to the kitchen, where she had heard Akumaru barking. Kurenai swiftly followed her, Hinata following closely behind, and apologized for her daughter's behavior. Naruto turned back to the door after watching everyone enter the kitchen and shaking his head in laughter, but a harsh voice called out to him before his hand could reach the handle. Don't you dare close that door, Gaki. When he looked out the doorway, he saw Koyuki Kazuhana, Tsunade, and Shizune strolling down the garden path together, with Kojima and two other men in armor trailing closely behind. Holding the door open for everyone to enter, he exclaimed, Hey, I'm glad you could make it. With her guards on either side, Koyuki paused at the door as Tsunade and Shizune entered. Koyuki took a bottle from one of her guards and handed it to the blonde, who gave it a funny look as he read the label. Thank you for the invitation, I didn't want to come empty-handed, so I brought this. Observing the bewilderment on his face as he attempted to identify it, she clarified, It's wine, it's like sake but has a fruity flavor. It's very popular back home. With his eyes back on the bottle, he said, Thanks. From Shikamaru to Konohamaru, nearly everyone at the party had brought a bottle of alcohol as a present. He was certain that it would take them months to consume all of the bottles they had. Especially since he had never been a big fan of sake's flavor. However, he had never tried wine before. Perhaps he would enjoy it. Tsunade interrupted his thoughts by calling out, Hey, are you going to invite her in or what? He hadn't realized he'd left her standing outside the door feeling foolish. He moved aside and beckoned her inside. Kojima stopped her before she could enter, saying sternly, Are you sure about this, lady? We don't know any of the people inside. You should let us check the place out first for any threats. Naruto joked, we're ninja, we're supposed to be a threat. However, the joke did not impress Kojima, all the more reason for her not to be here. Tsunade removed her green coat and gave it to Shizune, who went straight to find a place to hang it. Kojima, I understand that you're concerned about Lady Koyuki's safety, but this is a ninja village. By that logic you shouldn't have even come here. She turned back to Kojima and straightened her kimono. However, you did come to the village so we could provide you with protection, so if you don't believe she will be safe in a building with a squad that'll be guarding her, some of the strongest shinobi in the village, as well as myself, then maybe you need to look somewhere else for protection. Enjoying the expression on Kojima's face as he was put in his proper place, Koyuki said, see, I'll be fine. She nearly skipped into the house. He attempted to follow her inside, but she blocked his path before he could. She slammed the door shut after saying, just for that you can stand guard outside. As the Hokage said, there are plenty of people here that can keep me safe, so if you're so concerned about my safety then you can guard the outside of this place. While Tsunade nodded in agreement and the daimyo turned them with a broad smile on her face, Shizune watched in amazement at the almost casual manner in which Koyuki had dismissed her head of security. Alright, let's enjoy ourselves.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.